Some women do not cry because they are fragile. They cry because they have been holding together a life that quietly kept breaking in places no one could see. They cry because they kept showing up for work, answering messages, taking care of children, smiling at family gatherings, paying bills, making dinner, folding laundry, and acting normal while something inside them was still standing in the doorway of a goodbye that never became honest. And perhaps one of the deepest wounds is not only that someone left, betrayed, disappeared, or stopped choosing you. Perhaps one of the deepest wounds is that you had to keep functioning while your heart was still trying to understand what your mind had already begun to fear. You were not weak because you cried. You were human. You were overwhelmed. You were grieving more than one thing at once. You were grieving the person, but also the promise, the routine, the version of yourself who believed, the woman who kept making room, the woman who kept explaining, forgiving, waiting, hoping, the woman who thought love could become safe if she just became more patient, more understanding, more careful, more loyal, more quiet. And when the tears finally came, they were not proof that you had no strength left. They were proof that your body could no longer carry pain in silence without asking to be heard. There is a kind of crying that is not collapse. It is release. There is a kind of crying that does not mean you are defeated. It means the truth has finally reached a place deeper than denial. Because sometimes a woman does not break down when the betrayal happens. She breaks down later, when she finally stops trying to protect the person who hurt her from the full weight of what they did. She breaks down when she realizes she was holding a key to a house someone had already emptied. She breaks down when she understands that she was setting a table for a love that had stopped arriving long ago. She breaks down when the silence becomes louder than the excuses she kept making for it. And that kind of crying deserves tenderness, not shame. A painful but clarifying truth is this: betrayal does not only damage trust, it touches identity. It makes a woman question her judgment, her beauty, her timing, her softness, her instincts, her ability to know when she is being loved and when she is being used for comfort, access, attention, or convenience. Betrayal asks cruel questions inside the mind. How did I not see it? Why did I stay? Was I too much? Was I not enough? Did I imagine the tenderness? Did I love a person? Or did I love the version of him I kept trying to believe in? And when there is no apology, no explanation, no accountability, the mind begins to circle the wound like a room with no door. This is why silence creates obsessive loops. Not because you are dramatic, not because you want to suffer, not because you are addicted to pain, but because the human heart searches for order when something intimate becomes chaotic. Your mind replays conversations because it is trying to locate the exact moment things changed. Your body remembers tone, distance, delayed replies, cold mornings, strange pauses, affection that came back just long enough to keep you attached. You search the past because the present gave you no honest map. And when someone withholds closure, many women begin blaming themselves. They think, maybe I asked too much. Maybe I should have waited longer. Maybe I reacted wrong. Maybe if I had been calmer, softer, prettier, easier, less emotional, more available. But pause here, gently. A person committed to ambiguity will often make your clarity look like pressure. A person benefiting from your patience may call your needs too much. A person who wants access without responsibility may make your longing feel like weakness. And a person who never intended to fully choose you may still enjoy being chosen by you. That truth hurts, but it also frees something. Because your tears were not the problem. Your love was not the problem. Your need for honesty was not the problem. The problem was that you were trying to build safety with someone who kept moving the foundation. There is dignity in no longer begging confusion to become clarity. There is dignity in admitting, I cried because this mattered to me. Not because I was foolish, not because I was small, not because I had no self-respect, but because I gave something real, and something real deserves to be mourned when it is mishandled. Many women discover too late that intermittent affection can feel like love when the heart is starving. A little tenderness after days of distance, a warm message after cold silence, a soft touch after emotional neglect, a promise after uncertainty, a return after disappearance. And because the relief feels so powerful, the heart mistakes relief for security. But relief is not the same as love. A person who wounds you and then comforts you only enough to keep you near can create a bond that feels deep but is actually unstable. This is why you may have cried after missing someone who hurt you. This is why you may have wanted contact even after knowing better. This is why you may have felt ashamed for longing for the very person who made you feel invisible. That does not mean you are weak. It means your nervous system learned to associate their attention with oxygen. It means you were living in emotional scarcity and calling small portions a feast. It means a part of you was still waiting for the person who hurt you to become the person who would finally repair what they broke. And that waiting can exhaust a woman in ways no one sees. It is possible to be mature and still be devastated. It is possible to be intelligent and still be attached. It is possible to have survived many things and still find yourself crying on the bathroom floor because one person's silence touched an older wound you thought you had already outgrown. Being unchosen can reopen places inside you that were wounded long before this relationship. Old abandonment, old rejection, old memories of having to earn attention, old patterns of being useful, pleasant, strong, forgiving, quiet. Sometimes the heartbreak is not only about him. Sometimes it is about every moment in your life when love felt conditional. Every time you were chosen, only when you were convenient. Every season when your needs were treated like a burden. Every place where you learned to stay too long because leaving felt like failing. So when you cried, you may not have been crying only for the present. You may have been crying for the younger version of yourself who learned to accept crumbs and call it patience. You may have been crying for the woman who kept adjusting herself around someone else's emotional absence. You may have been crying for all the years you spent betraying your own knowing because hope sounded kinder than truth. And still, none of this makes you weak. It makes you honest enough to feel what happened. There is a difference between being soft and being unprotected. There is a difference between having a heart and handing it to someone careless. There is a difference between forgiveness and self-abandonment. And part of healing is learning those differences without becoming bitter, cold, or ashamed of your tenderness. Because the answer is not to stop feeling. The answer is to stop offering your deepest feeling to people who only know how to take from it. The answer is not to punish yourself for crying. The answer is to listen to what your tears were trying to tell you. Maybe they were saying, I am tired of pretending this does not hurt. Maybe they were saying, I cannot keep loving someone who only meets me in fragments. Maybe they were saying, I miss him, but I miss myself more. Maybe they were saying, I have carried this unanswered goodbye through too many rooms of my mind. Maybe they were saying, I need to come home to myself now. A woman begins to heal when reality becomes more sacred than longing. Not because longing disappears overnight. Not because memory stops visiting. Not because the heart suddenly becomes obedient. But because she stops building her life around the possibility that someone might finally become honest, present, accountable, and ready after she has already been emotionally dismantled waiting. Healing may begin quietly. It may begin with not sending the message, not checking the page, not rereading the old conversation at midnight, not asking another friend to help interpret what silence already revealed, not turning one small sign into a whole story, not calling emotional hunger intuition. It may begin with telling yourself, I can miss him and still not return. I can cry and still choose myself. I can love what I thought it was and still admit what it became. I can grieve without negotiating against my own reality. That is not weakness. That is the first shape of self-respect. And self-respect does not always arrive like confidence. Sometimes it arrives like grief. Sometimes it arrives with shaking hands, with tears on your face, with a chest that aches, with a voice that can barely whisper, I cannot keep doing this to myself. Sometimes dignity is not glamorous. Sometimes dignity is blocking the number while still wishing things had ended differently. Sometimes dignity is sleeping badly, but refusing to reopen the wound for temporary comfort. Sometimes dignity is admitting, I stayed too long, without using that truth to hate yourself. Because yes, maybe you did stay longer than you should have. But you stayed because you hoped, because you loved, because you saw potential, because you were taught to be patient. Because leaving meant grieving not only the person, but the future you had quietly built in your mind. You were not stupid. You were attached to a dream that had been fed just enough to survive. And now you are being asked to mourn what never fully became real. That kind of grief is complicated. When a relationship is ambiguous, hidden, unequal, inconsistent, or never fully claimed, the ending can feel harder to explain. People may not understand why you are hurting so deeply. They may say, but were you even together? They may wonder why it is taking so long. They may not know that unclear love can wound clearly. They may not understand that almost love can leave real scars because you were not only grieving what happened, you were grieving what almost happened, what should have happened, what was promised without words, what was implied through tenderness but denied through action. You were grieving the future that never actually had your name on it, though your heart had already moved in. So let the tears come without insulting yourself for them. Let them come with a hand over your own heart. Let them come as a witness, not as proof that you are powerless, but as evidence that something inside you is telling the truth. Crying does not erase your dignity. Begging someone to keep hurting you does. Crying does not make you weak. Abandoning yourself to keep access to someone unavailable does. Crying does not lower your worth. Letting someone consume your love carelessly while you keep calling it devotion can slowly teach you to forget your own value. And you are here now to remember, slowly, honestly, without performance. You are here to remember that someone's inability to choose you is not proof that you were lacking. It may only prove that they were unable, unwilling, divided, immature, afraid, selfish, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. And while that may explain something, it does not excuse everything. Your healing does not require you to hate them, but it may require you to stop protecting them from the truth. It may require you to say, they may have had reasons, but I still had wounds. They may have been confused, but I was still harmed. They may not have meant to destroy my peace, but I still have to rebuild it. That is emotional clarity. That is not revenge. That is not bitterness. That is the beginning of returning to yourself. So no, you are not weak because you cried. You cried because you loved in a place where love was not being held with care. You cried because your nervous system was exhausted from inconsistency. You cried because your soul knew the difference between being touched and being chosen. You cried because your heart was tired of translating silence into hope. You cried because the truth was painful, but pretending had become more painful. And maybe the tears are not here to drown you. Maybe they are here to cleanse the places where you kept blaming yourself for someone else's inability to love with honor. Maybe they are here to soften the shame. Maybe they are here to help you stop stitching meaning over wounds caused by refusal, not confusion. Maybe they are here to remind you that grief is not a flaw in your womanhood. It is part of how a woman releases what her dignity can no longer carry. So let this be the beginning, not the beginning of becoming hard, not the beginning of proving anything, not the beginning of chasing a better image of yourself so someone regrets losing you. Let this be the beginning of being honest, honest about what hurt, honest about what you tolerated, honest about what you needed, honest about what you can no longer call love. Because one day, the tears will not feel like evidence of weakness. They will feel like the water that helped you survive the fire. And when that day comes, you will understand something quietly powerful. You were not falling apart. You were finally refusing to keep yourself together around a lie. There is a particular shame that comes after crying over someone who did not treat you with care. It is not just the sadness of missing them. It is the embarrassment of missing them. The quiet humiliation of thinking, after everything they did, why does my heart still reach for them? The frustration of waking up and realizing they were the first thought in your mind. The anger of knowing better, yet still feeling the ache. The private grief of being old enough, wise enough, experienced enough, and still not immune to longing. And this is where many women begin to turn their pain against themselves. They do not only grieve the betrayal, they begin to punish themselves for being affected by it. They say, I should be stronger than this. I should be over this by now. I should not still care. I should not still cry. I should have known better. I should have left sooner. I should not have let someone have this much power over me. But healing does not begin with self-punishment. Healing begins when you stop treating your pain like a character flaw. You are not weak because the wound still speaks. You are not foolish because memory still visits. You are not less dignified because your body needs time to release someone your heart had deeply attached to. A woman can understand the truth and still need time to absorb it. That is important because the mind may accept reality long before the heart stops reaching for the old version of the story. Your mind may know he did not choose me, but your heart may still remember the tenderness. Your body may still remember the warmth. Your nervous system may still remember the relief of his return after silence. And this is why healing can feel like contradiction. One part of you knows you deserve peace. Another part still wants the person who disturbed it. One part of you knows the silence was an answer. Another part keeps hoping there is a hidden explanation that would make it hurt less. One part of you knows you cannot go back. Another part keeps visiting the past, looking for a door that no longer opens. This does not make you unstable. It makes you human after attachment. When love has been inconsistent, the heart does not detach cleanly. It untangles itself slowly from confusion, fantasy, habit, hope, grief, chemistry, fear, and memory. You may not only be letting go of a person. You may be letting go of the woman you became while trying to be loved by them. The woman who waited, the woman who interpreted, the woman who lowered her voice, the woman who tried not to need too much, the woman who became grateful for small effort, the woman who accepted partial presence because full absence felt unbearable. And when that woman begins to wake up, she may cry, not because she is weak, because waking up after self-abandonment can hurt. There is a painful moment when a woman realizes she did not only lose someone else, she misplaced herself. She left pieces of her dignity in conversations where she begged for basic honesty. She left pieces of her peace in nights spent decoding silence. She left pieces of her confidence in the hands of someone who kept her uncertain. She left pieces of her softness in a place where tenderness was consumed but not protected. And when she finally sees that clearly, the tears may come from a place deeper than heartbreak. They may come from recognition. A deeper truth about betrayal is that it can make you feel like a stranger to yourself. You look back and wonder, how did I become someone who accepted so little? How did I become someone who waited for crumbs? How did I become someone who apologized for having needs? How did I become someone who confused anxiety with passion? But please, be careful with that question. Do not ask it like an accusation. Ask it like a woman trying to understand herself with mercy. Because many women do not overgive because they have no intelligence. They overgive because they were trained somewhere along the way to believe that love must be earned through endurance. They learn to be patient before they learn to be protected. They learn to be understanding before they learn to be honest about pain. They learn to keep the peace before they learn to listen to the body when peace had already left. And so, when someone gives them inconsistency, they do not always recognize it as danger. Sometimes they recognize it as a familiar assignment. They think, if I love better, maybe this will become safe. But love cannot heal a relationship where only one person is willing to be truthful. Love cannot build a home with someone who keeps one foot outside the door. Love cannot turn emotional absence into commitment by becoming more available, more loyal, more forgiving, more silent. And this is where tears can become sacred information. Your tears may be telling you, I am tired of loving in a place where I am not being met. They may be telling you, I cannot keep calling anxiety devotion. They may be telling you, I have confused endurance with intimacy. They may be telling you, something in me is ready to stop begging for what should have been offered freely. That kind of crying is not weakness. It is the body telling the truth before the mouth is ready. It is the soul refusing to keep performing peace. It is the inner life saying, enough. Not in anger, not in hatred, but in truth. Many women are afraid that if they cry, they are going backward. But grief is not a straight road. Some days you will feel steady. Some days you will feel almost free. Some days you will believe you have finally accepted everything. And then a song, a date, a street, a smell, a phrase, a photograph, or a quiet evening will open a door inside you, and suddenly you are back in the ache. That does not mean you failed. It means something inside you is still being integrated. Healing is not proven by never crying again. Healing is proven by what you do after the tears. Do you use the tears as a reason to return to what harmed you? Or do you let them pass through you while still honoring the boundary? Do you tell yourself you are pathetic? Or do you say, this is grief moving through me and I can survive this wave? Do you reach for the person who made you bleed? Or do you reach for your own breath, your own body, your own present moment? A woman rebuilding herself must learn not to fear emotional waves. A wave is not a command. Longing is not a command. Missing someone is not a command. Crying is not a command. You can feel something deeply and still not obey it. You can miss the person and still protect yourself from the pattern. You can love what was tender and still refuse what was destructive. You can ache for contact and still understand that contact may restart the injury. This is where dignity becomes practice, not a mood, not a performance, not an image for other people to admire. Practice. Dignity is practice when you stop rereading old messages that reopen the wound. Dignity is practice when you stop explaining your pain to someone committed to misunderstanding it. Dignity is practice when you remove yourself from the places where your hope keeps getting manipulated. Dignity is practice when you admit, I cannot heal while drinking from the same source that poisoned my peace. And yes, that may make you cry too, because boundaries can feel like grief before they feel like freedom. A boundary may feel cruel when you are used to abandoning yourself. It may feel cold when you are used to over-explaining. It may feel wrong when you are used to earning love through availability. But sometimes what feels wrong is simply unfamiliar. Sometimes peace feels empty at first because chaos became the only proof that something mattered. Sometimes silence after leaving feels frightening because you are no longer waiting for someone else to define the emotional weather of your day, and that emptiness can make you cry. But emptiness is not always loss. Sometimes emptiness is space being returned to you. Space where anxiety used to live. Space where waiting used to sit. Space where your mind used to drag an unanswered goodbye from room to room, hoping it would finally speak. Now that space may feel quiet, and in that quiet, grief may rise. Let it, but do not decorate it into a reason to go back. Do not turn one lonely evening into proof that you made the wrong decision. Do not confuse the pain of withdrawal with the voice of destiny. Sometimes the heart cries not because the past was right, but because the nervous system is adjusting to the absence of familiar pain. There is a difference between missing a person and missing the emotional cycle. There is a difference between love and attachment to uncertainty. There is a difference between wanting him and wanting relief from the ache he left behind. And one of the most healing questions a woman can ask herself is, what exactly am I missing? Am I missing who he truly was? Or am I missing who he became for brief moments when he wanted access to me? Am I missing love? Or am I missing the hope that love was finally about to begin? Am I missing his presence? Or am I missing the version of myself who felt wanted when he leaned close? Am I missing a relationship? Or am I missing the future I kept building from fragments? These questions are not meant to shame you. They are meant to bring the lights on, because longing often blurs the room. It makes the empty house look full again. It makes the silence sound like mystery. It makes inconsistency feel complicated instead of harmful. It makes emotional starvation feel like a love story that only needs one more chapter. But clarity is a form of mercy. And sometimes clarity says, I was not crying because I lost a great love. I was crying because I finally saw how long I survived on the possibility of one. That truth may hurt, but it can also release you from worshiping what wounded you. There are women listening right now who are not crying every day because they want to. They are crying because their identity is under repair. They are trying to trust themselves again. They are trying to forgive themselves for ignoring signs. They are trying to forgive themselves for accepting explanations that never satisfied the body. They are trying to forgive themselves for staying available to someone who stayed uncertain. They are trying to forgive themselves for letting hope silence intuition. If that is you, please hear this gently. Self-forgiveness is not pretending it did not matter. Self-forgiveness is telling the truth without using it as a weapon against yourself. Yes, you may have ignored your intuition. Yes, you may have stayed after the first betrayal of trust. Yes, you may have accepted less than you needed. Yes, you may have answered when you should have rested. Yes, you may have confused his return with his readiness. But you can learn from that without despising the woman who was doing the best she could with the wounds, hopes, conditioning, and hunger she had at the time. You do not heal by humiliating your former self. You heal by understanding her. You say to her, I see why you stayed. I see why you hoped. I see why you cried. I see why you kept trying to turn little signs into safety. But I am here now, and I will not abandon us again. That is how self-trust begins to return. Not all at once, not loudly, but through repeated acts of inner protection. You keep promises to yourself, small ones at first. You do not check what you said you would not check. You do not reopen the conversation you know will leave you shaking. You do not offer emotional access to someone who has not shown emotional responsibility. You do not trade your peace for the temporary comfort of being noticed. And when you fail, because sometimes you do not call yourself weak, you return. You return to truth. You return to breath. You return to the body. You return to the woman you are becoming. You return without making your stumble into your identity. This is mature healing, not pretending you no longer care, not acting above the pain, not performing strength while your inner life is begging for tenderness. Mature healing says, I still hurt, but I will not let hurt make decisions for me. I still miss him, but I will not let missing him erase what happened. I still cry, but I will not confuse tears with defeat. I still feel the pull, but I am learning that not every pull is sacred. That is discernment. And discernment is often born in the very places where you once felt ashamed. You may have cried because you were betrayed, but you may rise because you finally believe your own pain. You may have cried because someone did not choose you, but you may heal because you stop auditioning for a role that should have been honored freely. You may have cried because silence made you feel invisible, but you may rebuild because you stop asking a silent person to confirm that your suffering was real. Your suffering is real, even if they never admit it. Even if they moved on quickly, even if they act untouched, even if they rewrite the story, even if they call you emotional, even if no one else saw what it cost you to love them. Your tears are not waiting for their permission to mean something. They already mean something. They mean you reached the edge of what your heart could carry. They mean your inner life is asking to be protected. They mean there is a part of you that still believes in love, but is learning not to abandon herself for it. And that part of you deserves gentleness, not mockery, not pressure, not shame. Gentleness, because the goal is not to become a woman who never cries. The goal is to become a woman who no longer betrays herself after crying. A woman who can weep and still choose truth. A woman who can ache and still honor the boundary. A woman who can remember and still move forward. A woman who can stay tender without staying available to harm. That is not weakness. That is quiet power. That is grace with a spine. That is the beginning of a woman returning to herself, not as she was before the wound, but as someone who can finally say, my tears did not make me less worthy. They only revealed where I had been carrying pain alone for too long. There is another kind of crying that many grown women know. It is the crying that comes after you finally stop defending the person who hurt you. For a long time, you may have protected them in your own mind. You explained their distance. You softened their neglect. You gave their silence a sad childhood, a stressful job, a complicated past, a fear of intimacy, a season of confusion, a reason that made their inconsistency feel less cruel. And perhaps some of those reasons were real, but reasons do not erase impact. A person can be wounded and still wound you. A person can be afraid and still abandon you. A person can be confused and still benefit from your devotion. A person can have pain and still become careless with yours. This is one of the most difficult truths for a compassionate woman to accept. Because if you have a deep heart, you may instinctively look for the wound behind someone's behavior. You may ask, what happened to them? Before you ask, what is happening to me? And that tenderness is beautiful. But tenderness without self-protection can become a place where your dignity slowly disappears. There are women who cried not because they did not understand him. They cried because they understood him too well and still were not loved well in return. They cried because they kept making room for his wounds, while he kept making excuses for the wounds he caused. They cried because their compassion became a bridge he crossed whenever he wanted comfort, but never a home he helped build with responsibility. And there comes a moment when your own heart whispers, I can understand him and still choose me. That moment may make you weep because it means you are no longer using empathy as a way to stay attached. It means you are no longer confusing someone's potential with their actual presence. It means you are no longer calling yourself loving while quietly abandoning your own reality. Sometimes the tears come when illusion begins to fall. Not dramatically, not all at once, but layer by layer. You remember a moment you once called complicated, and now you see it was disrespect. You remember a silence you once called space, and now you see it was avoidance. You remember a return you once called love, and now you see it was access. You remember a promise you once held like a candle, and now you see it was never attached to consistent action. And when those layers fall, grief deepens. Because you are not only losing the person, you are losing the story that helped you survive the pain of staying. This is why clarity can hurt before it heals. For a while, fantasy may have protected you. Hope may have softened the evidence. Potential may have decorated an empty room. You may have been holding a key to a house someone had already emptied. But as long as you believed they might come back and fill it, you could keep standing at the door. Clarity asks you to turn on the lights. And when the lights come on, you may see how long you were waiting in a place that no longer contained love, only memory. That realization can break your heart in a cleaner way. Not cleaner because it hurts less. Cleaner because it finally tells the truth. There is dignity in clean pain. Confused pain keeps asking the wrong questions. Clean pain says, this hurt me. Confused pain asks, how do I make him understand? Clean pain says, I was not chosen with care. Confused pain asks, what can I become so he finally chooses me? Clean pain says, the pattern was real. Confused pain asks, maybe I imagined it? Clean pain says, I can grieve this without returning to it. Confused pain asks, what if this was the best love I will ever have? And that last question may be the one that makes you cry the hardest. Because some women do not stay only because of love. They stay because of fear. Fear that starting over will be too exhausting. Fear that the years have already taken too much. Fear that their softness has been wasted. Fear that no one will understand their depth. Fear that their body, age, story, responsibilities, children, scars, or guarded heart will make love harder to find again. And so they cling to what is hurting them because the unknown feels like another kind of grief. If this is you, do not shame yourself. Fear can make a familiar wound feel safer than an unfamiliar freedom. But ask yourself gently, am I crying because I lost love or because I am afraid there is no better love ahead? Am I missing him or am I terrified of meeting myself without the story I built around him? Am I grieving the relationship or am I grieving the years I gave to someone who never planned to honor them fully? These questions are tender but they are not cruel. They help you stop mistaking attachment for destiny. They help you stop turning fear into loyalty. They help you see that some of the pain is not proof that you should go back. Some of the pain is proof that your heart is finally being asked to leave a place where it survived too long on too little. One painful but clarifying truth is that a woman can be emotionally starving and still defend the person who controls the crumbs. She may say, "But he can be so kind." And maybe he can. She may say, "But when we are good, it feels beautiful." And maybe it does. She may say, "But I know there's a deeper side of him." And perhaps there is. But love cannot be measured only by moments. Love must be measured by patterns. A moment can make you feel wanted. A pattern tells you whether you are safe. A moment can make you feel chosen. A pattern reveals whether someone is willing to keep choosing you when it costs effort, honesty, consistency, and humility. A moment can touch your loneliness. A pattern either honors your heart or teaches it to beg. This is why your tears may have felt so confusing, because you were not crying over only the cruelty. You were also crying over the beauty, the laughter that felt real, the conversation that felt rare, the tenderness that made you believe, the way he could look at you when he wanted to be close, the small signs that made you think, "There it is. That is the person I knew was there." But a woman can be hurt by someone who also gave her beautiful moments. Both can be true. And maturity is learning to tell the whole truth without using the beautiful parts to excuse the destructive pattern. You do not have to deny the tenderness to admit the harm. You do not have to pretend it meant nothing to accept that it was not enough. You do not have to hate him to understand that loving him cost you too much of yourself. This is where many women begin to cry differently. Not with panic, not with desperation, but with grief that has started to become wise. The tears become quieter, heavier, more honest. They are no longer asking, "Why didn't he choose me?" They begin asking, "Why did I keep choosing a place where I had to keep proving I was worth choosing?" That question is not meant to make you hate yourself. It is meant to bring you back. Because the deepest healing does not happen when you finally understand every reason someone failed you. The deepest healing begins when you understand why you kept negotiating with your own pain. Why did you accept uncertainty as normal? Why did you minimize your needs? Why did you feel guilty asking for consistency? Why did you call your intuition anxiety? Why did you confuse intensity with intimacy? Why did you keep trying to earn what should have been freely given? Again, ask with mercy, not accusation. Mercy allows the truth to enter without destroying you. Perhaps you stayed because somewhere inside you believed love meant proving you would not leave. Perhaps you stayed because you wanted to be the woman who was finally enough to change the story. Perhaps you stayed because the beginning was beautiful and you kept trusting the beginning more than the pattern. Perhaps you stayed because every time you were ready to walk away, he gave just enough warmth to make your grief feel premature. Perhaps you stayed because your nervous system mistook uncertainty for passion. Perhaps you stayed because leaving meant admitting that the future you were quietly building had no foundation, and that admission is not small. It is not simple. It can feel like watching a house collapse after you spent years decorating the rooms in your imagination. You imagined holidays. You imagined peace. You imagined being publicly chosen. You imagined ordinary mornings where love did not feel like a negotiation. You imagined finally resting in someone's consistency. So when it ends, you are not only crying over him, you are crying over the life your heart rehearsed. You are crying over the table you set for a love that stopped arriving long ago. You are crying over the version of yourself who kept hoping the next conversation would finally turn the key. And maybe beneath all that, you are crying because you know you cannot keep waiting without losing more of yourself. That knowing can feel like heartbreak, but it is also grace. Grace does not always feel gentle at first. Sometimes grace feels like the painful inability to keep lying to yourself. Sometimes grace feels like exhaustion so deep you can no longer perform hope. Sometimes grace feels like a boundary you did not want to make, but your soul could no longer live without. Sometimes grace is the tearful sentence, I love him, but I cannot keep disappearing inside this. That is not weakness. That is awakening. There is a sacred dignity in the moment a woman stops arguing with what is clear. Not because she is no longer sad. Not because she no longer misses him. Not because she has become untouchable. But because she is tired of using her longing as evidence against her own reality. She stops saying, if I still cry, maybe it means I should go back. She starts saying, if I still cry, it means something in me is still releasing what I survived. She stops saying, if I miss him, maybe he was right for me. She starts saying, I can miss what felt good and still honor what hurt. She stops saying, if he comes back, maybe that proves I mattered. She starts saying, my value cannot depend on whether someone returns to the place where they left me bleeding. That is the kind of truth that steadies a woman, quietly, slowly, deeply. And when the tears come after that, they may begin to wash shame away instead of deepen it. Because shame says you are weak for caring. Truth says you cared because you are capable of attachment, devotion, and depth. Shame says you were foolish for believing. Truth says you believed because you were shown fragments that looked like possibility. Shame says you should have left sooner. Truth says you are leaving now, and that matters. Shame says you lost yourself. Truth says you are finding yourself with more honesty than before. A woman does not rebuild dignity by pretending she was never hurt. She rebuilds dignity by refusing to let hurt define the rest of her life. She rebuilds it by eating again, sleeping again, moving her body again, answering herself gently again, returning to friendships she neglected while consumed by confusion, taking care of the home that silently watched her cry, creating routines that are not built around someone else's emotional availability. She rebuilds it by letting ordinary life become holy again. A quiet breakfast, clean sheets, a walk without checking the phone, a Sunday afternoon without waiting, a mirror she can look into without contempt, a night where she cries but does not contact him, a morning where she wakes tired but still chooses peace. This is not dramatic healing. It is real healing. The kind no one applauds. The kind that happens in the hidden places where a woman decides one small choice at a time. I will not keep making a home inside my own abandonment And there may be days when you do not feel strong at all. Days when your chest feels heavy. Days when you wonder if he ever thinks of you. Days when you imagine him giving someone else what you begged for. Days when you feel replaced, erased, almost embarrassed by how quickly he seemed able to continue. That pain is sharp. Being replaced quickly can make a woman question whether anything was real. It can make her feel like a chapter he skimmed while she was writing a whole book. It can make her wonder if the relationship meant less to him than it did to her. But another person's speed does not measure your significance. Some people move quickly because they cannot sit with themselves. Some people replace because replacement is easier than accountability. Some people seek new admiration because old wounds require honesty they are not ready to face. And even if he truly did move on without looking back, that still does not reduce the value of what you gave. A careless person can mishandle something precious. Their carelessness does not make it less precious. Your love did not become cheap because someone consumed it without reverence. Your loyalty did not become foolish because someone failed to honor it. Your tears did not become embarrassing because someone acted untouched by them. You are allowed to grieve what was real to you, even if they are not mature enough to acknowledge its weight. But as you grieve, do not let their emotional absence become the final authority over your worth. Do not make their silence your mirror. Do not make their inability your identity. Do not make their refusal your definition. You are not the woman who was not chosen. You are the woman who is learning to stop standing before closed doors with flowers in her hands. You are the woman who is learning that love does not require self-erasure to prove sincerity. You are the woman who is learning that tears can fall without washing away self-respect. And maybe today, you still cry. Maybe today, the wound is still tender. Maybe today, you are not ready to call this growth. That is okay. You do not have to turn pain into wisdom before you have fully admitted that it hurt. But hold this close. Crying is not the opposite of healing. Sometimes crying is the doorway into the truth you were finally brave enough to feel. And the woman who can feel the truth without running back to the lie is not weak. She is becoming free in the most honest way a heart can become free. There is a moment in healing when a woman realizes her tears were not only about losing him, they were also about the exhaustion of carrying the relationship alone. The emotional labor, the waiting, the explaining, the forgiving, the adjusting, the careful tone, the softened questions. The way she learned to make her needs smaller so the connection would not disappear completely. She cried because she was tired of being the one who noticed everything. The change in his voice, the distance in his replies, the affection that came and went, the way plans became vague, the way warmth became rare, the way she started feeling grateful for the bare minimum because at least it was something. And that is a lonely kind of love. Not because you were physically alone every day, but because you were emotionally alone inside something that was supposed to be shared. A woman can be in communication with someone and still feel abandoned. She can have access to his body, his words, his attention in fragments, and still feel deeply unseen. She can be held for a moment and still know, somewhere in her chest, that she is not being fully chosen. And that kind of knowing can make tears rise before the mind has language for it. Because the body often tells the truth first. The body feels the inconsistency. The body feels the uncertainty. The body feels when love has become a place of waiting instead of resting. Maybe you called it anxiety. Maybe you called it overthinking. Maybe you told yourself you were being too sensitive. Maybe you tried to pray it away, sleep it off, stay busy, be reasonable, be patient, be mature. But sometimes what you called overthinking was your intuition trying to survive in a situation where honesty was missing. Sometimes what you called anxiety was your nervous system living beside someone unpredictable. Sometimes what you called weakness was your soul grieving the distance between what you were giving and what you were receiving. That is why the tears came. Not because you were unable to handle love, but because what you were handling was not love in its healthy form. It was uncertainty dressed in tenderness. It was emotional starvation interrupted by occasional sweetness. It was closeness without consistency. It was chemistry without safety. It was a table set again and again for someone who only came when it suited them. And a woman cannot live long on that without becoming tired in places rest does not easily reach. There is a kind of fatigue that sleep cannot fix. It comes from being emotionally vigilant for too long, watching for signs, listening for changes, wondering what mood he will be in, wondering if today will bring warmth or distance, wondering if speaking the truth will bring closeness or punishment, wondering if silence means he is busy, angry, losing interest, hiding something, or simply unconcerned. That kind of uncertainty teaches the body to stay alert. Even when nothing is happening, something inside you is waiting, waiting for the message, waiting for the explanation, waiting for the shift, waiting for him to become the person he was in the beginning, waiting for the version of love you kept believing was still possible. And when a body has waited too long, it cries. It cries because it has been living in suspense. It cries because it wants rest. It cries because no grown woman should have to become a detective in order to feel emotionally safe with someone who says he cares. A deeper truth is this: love that keeps you guessing can slowly train you to distrust your own peace. When peace appears, you do not recognize it. It feels too quiet, too unfamiliar, too empty. When someone is consistent, you may even feel suspicious because inconsistency taught your nervous system that love comes with tension. It taught you that affection must be chased, protected, decoded, earned. It taught you that calm means something is about to go wrong. And so, when the relationship ends, the silence afterward may feel unbearable at first. Not because it is worse than what you had, but because you are no longer receiving the small doses of attention that kept the emotional cycle alive. This is why you may cry after choosing distance. This is why boundaries can feel like withdrawal. This is why not checking his page may feel like holding your breath. This is why not replying may feel like tearing your own heart away from a door it has knocked on for too long. Please understand this with compassion. You are not weak because detachment hurts. You are not weak because your body still craves what your wisdom knows is not safe. You are not weak because peace feels strange after chaos. You are learning a new emotional climate. You are teaching your heart that love does not have to arrive with panic. You are teaching your body that silence can mean rest, not abandonment. You are teaching your inner life that a day without waiting is not empty. It is yours. And that may take time. There is no shame in time. Some wounds need more than a decision. They need repetition. They need gentleness. They need new habits. They need mornings where you choose not to reopen what hurt you. They need evenings where you let the ache pass without turning it into a message. They need moments where you whisper, I miss him, but I will not return to the version of myself I became with him. That sentence may save you, because sometimes the question is not only, do I miss him? Sometimes the question is, who did I become while loving him? Did I become smaller? Did I become more anxious? Did I become less honest with myself? Did I become more tolerant of disrespect? Did I become someone who waited for affection instead of living inside her own life? Did I become someone who called crumbs grace because hunger had lowered my expectations? These questions may hurt, but they are merciful. They shift the focus from his mystery to your recovery, from his intentions to your impact, from whether he loved you to whether you were well. Because sometimes a woman spends so much time asking, did he love me, that she forgets to ask, was I safe? Was I respected? Was I emotionally nourished? Was I becoming more myself or less? Love is not only a feeling someone claims. Love is the environment their presence creates. If his presence made you anxious, diminished, confused, ashamed of your needs, and afraid to speak honestly, then the question can not only be whether he had feelings. Feelings are not enough to build a safe home. A person may feel affection and still lack character. A person may miss you and still not be willing to mature. A person may desire you and still not be able to honor you. A person may cry over losing access to you and still not be prepared to love you with consistency. That truth may feel severe, but it is not meant to harden you. It is meant to protect the part of you that kept mistaking emotional intensity for emotional truth. One painful but clarifying truth is that some women cry because they finally see the difference between being wanted and being valued. Being wanted can feel intoxicating. It can come through late night messages, intense looks, sudden returns, jealousy, longing, apologies, and moments of closeness. But being valued is steadier. Being valued does not require you to keep proving your place. Being valued does not leave you guessing where you stand. Being valued does not feed you tenderness in private while denying you honor in reality. Being valued does not make you beg for the emotional basics. And when a woman realizes she was wanted in moments but not valued in the pattern, her tears may carry a grief words can barely hold. Because desire can imitate devotion when the heart is lonely. Chemistry can imitate connection when the soul is hungry. Potential can imitate promise when a woman has waited a long time to feel chosen. And intermittent affection can imitate depth because the highs feel so powerful after the lows. But love, real love, does not require you to survive emotional famine just to appreciate a sip of water. Real love does not keep you standing in the cold, grateful whenever the door opens halfway. Real love does not make your dignity feel like a threat. Real love does not ask you to abandon yourself in order to maintain access. So if you cried, maybe you were not crying because you lost something stable. Maybe you were crying because you finally stopped pretending instability was intimacy. Maybe you were crying because you had been stitching meaning over wounds caused by refusal, not confusion. Maybe you were crying because you were tired of translating his inconsistency into a language that made him look more loving than he was willing to be. And that kind of crying can be part of your return. Not return to him. Return to yourself. Return to the woman who can say, my needs are not evidence that I am difficult. Return to the woman who can say, my tears do not make me weak, but they do tell me where I have been bleeding. Return to the woman who can say, I no longer want to be loved in a way that requires me to disappear. This is not bitterness. This is self-recognition. And self-recognition is one of the first lights that enters after betrayal. For a while, betrayal makes you look outward. What did he do? Why did he do it? Who is he with now? Was any of it real? Did he ever care? Does he regret it? Will he come back? Will he apologize? These questions are understandable. But if you stay there too long, your healing becomes tied to someone who already showed you they were willing to leave you without enough truth. At some point, the questions must turn gently inward. What did this awaken in me? What did I ignore to keep the hope alive? What did I need that I was afraid to ask for? What part of me believed love had to be earned through suffering? What did I lose touch with while trying to keep him close? What would it mean to choose myself now without pretending I am not in pain? These questions bring power back. Not the power of control, the power of attention, because your attention is sacred. What you keep studying becomes the center of your inner life. If you study his silence every night, silence becomes your teacher. If you study his new life, his new person, his absence, his contradictions, his mixed signals, his emotional weather, you may keep abandoning your own becoming, but if you begin to study yourself with compassion, something changes. You begin to notice what you need. You begin to notice what drains you. You begin to notice what peace feels like. You begin to notice when longing is trying to rewrite reality. You begin to notice when shame is pretending to be wisdom. You begin to notice the small ways you can stop leaving yourself. And that is how a woman returns. Not through one grand declaration. Through small repeated acts of not abandoning herself. You drink water when grief makes your mouth dry. You eat something warm when sadness takes your appetite. You step outside when the walls of your mind feel too close. You call someone safe instead of contacting someone familiar. You write the truth in a journal instead of sending it to someone who has already shown you they will not hold it carefully. You let the tears come, but you do not let them drive you back into a pattern that has already explained itself. This is what emotional maturity looks like. Not the absence of crying, the presence of care after crying, not the absence of longing, the presence of discernment beside longing, not the absence of grief, the presence of self-respect inside grief. And maybe that is the lesson you never wanted, but now must honor. Your softness needs guardianship. Your loyalty needs discernment. Your patience needs limits. Your forgiveness needs truth. Your love needs a place where it will not be treated like an endless resource for someone else's emptiness. Because a woman can love deeply and still say, "This is not safe for me." She can care and still close the door. She can remember the good and still refuse the pattern. She can cry and still walk away. There is something quietly powerful about a woman who stops negotiating against her own reality. She may not look powerful at first. She may look tired. She may look tender. She may look like she is barely holding herself together. But inside, something sacred is happening. She is no longer using love as an excuse to remain in harm. She is no longer confusing loyalty with self-erasure. She is no longer asking someone who abandoned her emotionally to become the judge of whether her pain was valid. She is beginning to believe herself, and that may be the beginning of everything. Because betrayal does not only make you doubt another person, it can make you doubt your own eyes. You saw the distance, but you questioned it. You felt the shift, but you explained it away. You noticed the pattern, but you told yourself to be patient. You heard your intuition, but you feared it was insecurity. So part of healing is learning to say, "I did know." Maybe not all of it, maybe not clearly, but something in me knew enough. That does not mean you failed by not leaving immediately. It means your inner wisdom was trying to speak through fear, attachment, hope, and old wounds. Now, you can listen more carefully, not with punishment, with tenderness. You can say, "Next time, I will not require myself to have absolute proof before I honor my discomfort. Next time, I will not call confusion love. Next time, I will not keep setting a table for someone who only arrives when hunger suits him. Next time, I will not give my whole heart to a person who only gives me fragments." This is not cynicism. This is discernment. Discernment does not kill love. It protects it from being wasted where it cannot grow. And perhaps the tears you cried are part of that protection forming inside you. Perhaps they are washing away the old belief that suffering proves devotion. Perhaps they are loosening the shame that kept you silent. Perhaps they are helping you grieve the future that never had your name on it so you can begin writing a life that does. A life where your mornings are not ruled by someone else's absence. A life where your phone is not the altar where your peace is sacrificed. A life where love does not require guessing games. A life where your body feels calm in the presence of affection. A life where you are not punished for needing clarity. A life where you are not kept emotionally near while being denied real commitment. A life where your tears are not wasted trying to soften someone who has already chosen comfort over accountability. You deserve a life that does not make you feel foolish for having a heart. And until that life feels possible, begin with the smallest truth. You cried because you were hurt. You cried because it mattered. You cried because you are not made of stone. You cried because your soul was tired of pretending that partial love was enough. You cried because somewhere inside, the woman you are becoming was asking the woman you had been to stop carrying what was never hers alone. And maybe that is why the tears felt so heavy. They were carrying years, years of hope, years of patience, years of trying to be chosen without asking too much, years of swallowing words, years of telling yourself to understand, years of confusing endurance with love. Let those years be mourned. Do not rush that grief. Do not make yourself cheerful before you have been honest. Do not turn healing into another performance. Some days, the most courageous thing you will do is admit, I am still sad, and then care for yourself anyway. That is not weakness. That is emotional honesty with dignity. And every time you cry without abandoning yourself afterward, something inside you learns a new truth. Pain can visit, but it does not have to rule. Longing can rise, but it does not have to lead. Memory can speak, but it does not have to become a command. And tears can fall without taking your worth with them. You are not weak because you cried. You are learning how to be truthful without being destroyed by the truth. You are learning how to be tender without being unprotected. You are learning how to grieve without glorifying what wounded you. You are learning how to release someone without erasing the woman who loved them. And that woman deserves respect, even now, especially now. There is a quiet place in healing where a woman begins to understand that her tears were not asking her to return. They were asking her to listen. For so long, she may have treated her tears like evidence that she still belonged to the person who hurt her. She may have thought, if I still cry, maybe I still love him too much to leave. If I still ache, maybe the story is not over. If I still feel this deeply, maybe there is something sacred here that I am supposed to keep fighting for. But feeling deeply does not always mean you are meant to stay. Sometimes feeling deeply only means the attachment was real. Sometimes it means the wound touched something old. Sometimes it means your body is releasing what your mind has finally stopped defending. Sometimes it means grief is walking through the rooms of your heart, gathering what was left behind. And grief does not always know how to be quiet. It will come while you are washing dishes. It will come when you pass a place you once imagined differently. It will come when you hear a song that remembers more than you want it to. It will come after a normal day, when you thought you were fine, and suddenly your chest tightens because the absence becomes specific again. Not just the absence of him, the absence of being held with certainty, the absence of being chosen without confusion, the absence of a future you once thought was slowly becoming yours. And when the tears come, the old habit may be to shame yourself, to say, why am I still here emotionally? Why does this still touch me? Why can't I just be done? Why am I crying over someone who did not even have the courage to love me properly? But a heart does not heal by being insulted into silence. A heart heals when it is told the truth with tenderness. So, tell yourself the truth. I am crying because something mattered. I am crying because I invested years, hope, imagination, loyalty, patience, and tenderness into a place that did not become safe. I am crying because I am not only letting go of him, I am letting go of who I thought I would become beside him. I am crying because I am finally feeling the pain I was too busy surviving to feel. That is not weakness. That is emotional honesty, returning to the body. A deeper truth is that many women do not fully cry while they are still inside the relationship. They manage, they monitor, they adapt. They keep track of the emotional temperature. They try not to provoke distance. They choose words carefully. They become experts at noticing what is missing while pretending they do not notice too much. And because they are still hoping, they do not allow themselves to fully grieve. Because to fully grieve while still staying would mean admitting something has already died. So the tears wait. They wait behind the strength, behind the responsibilities, behind the polite smile, behind the I'm okay, behind the late night overthinking, behind the prayers that sound calm but are really begging for relief. Then one day, when the body realizes it no longer has to protect the illusion, the tears begin. And they may feel endless at first. Not because you are broken, because you postponed grief for so long that it is finally arriving with everything it was carrying. The disappointment, the humiliation, the confusion, the anger, the embarrassment, the longing, the disbelief, the exhaustion, the private question. How did I become so loyal to something that was hurting me? And that question can be devastating because it is not really about him anymore. It is about the place inside you that learned to survive by staying close to people who made love uncertain. It is about the part of you that believed being patient might finally make you chosen. It is about the part of you that confused being needed with being cherished. It is about the part of you that thought if you could just endure a little longer, explain a little better, love a little softer, forgive a little faster, then maybe the relationship would become what your heart kept seeing in fragments. But fragments cannot build a home. A few beautiful moments cannot carry the weight of a pattern that keeps wounding you. One warm evening cannot erase months of emotional distance. One apology cannot repair what repeated behavior keeps reopening. One return cannot become commitment if it is not followed by responsibility. And one person's inability to choose you fully cannot become the final word over your worth. This is where many women begin to experience a different kind of grief. The grief of no longer being able to lie to themselves. It is painful when the fantasy loses its power. It is painful when the mind stops turning every small sign into evidence of love. It is painful when you can no longer romanticize inconsistency. It is painful when you finally admit that the person you kept waiting for was not hidden behind fear, stress, timing, confusion, or pain. Maybe this is simply who he was able to be. And maybe who he was able to be was not enough to protect who you are. That sentence may hurt, but it also gives you back your life. Because the question is no longer, how do I get him to become what I need? The question becomes, what happens to me if I keep waiting for someone to become honest at the cost of my own peace? What happens to my spirit if I keep calling inconsistency love? What happens to my dignity if I keep negotiating with a pattern that has already answered me? What happens to my future if I keep standing beside a door that only opens when someone is lonely? These are not easy questions, but they are the kind of questions that help a woman stop bleeding into places that never learned how to hold her. There is dignity in accepting that your tears are information, not commands, not proof of failure, not proof that you should go back. Information. They may tell you where you were neglected. They may tell you where you silenced yourself. They may tell you where you hoped against reality. They may tell you where you need gentler care. They may tell you where your boundaries have been too porous. They may tell you where your self-worth became dependent on someone else's emotional availability. And when you listen to tears that way, they become less frightening. You stop asking, why am I crying? And you begin asking, what is this part of me trying to protect now? Maybe your tears are protecting you from numbness. Maybe they are protecting you from returning too quickly. Maybe they are protecting you from pretending. Maybe they are protecting you from becoming hard just to look healed. Maybe they are protecting the softest part of you from being handed back to someone who never carried it carefully. A woman can be soft and wise. She can be tender and discerning. She can be loving and unavailable to harm. She can cry and still be clear. This is a mature kind of strength, not the strength that says nothing affects me, but the strength that says this affected me deeply and I will not let it destroy my relationship with myself. Because that is one of the hidden dangers of betrayal. It can make you turn against yourself. You may begin to distrust your own heart because it loved someone who hurt you. You may distrust your own judgment because you miss signs or minimize them. You may distrust your own softness because it was used. You may distrust your own hope because it kept you waiting, but your heart is not the enemy. Your tenderness is not the enemy. Your ability to love is not the enemy. What needs to change is not your capacity for devotion. What needs to change is where you place it. What needs to change is how quickly you give access. What needs to change is whether you let consistency, honesty, humility, and emotional responsibility matter as much as chemistry, longing, and potential. Because self-trust is not rebuilt by becoming suspicious of everyone. Self-trust is rebuilt by becoming faithful to yourself, by not abandoning what you see, by not dismissing what you feel, by not over-explaining another person's pattern until your own pain becomes invisible, by not calling yourself difficult for needing the basics of emotional safety. And the basics matter. Clarity matters. Consistency matters. Respect matters. Accountability matters. Being publicly and privately honored matters. Being able to speak without fear of withdrawal matters. Being chosen in action, not only in mood, matters. If you cried because these things were missing, your tears were not weakness. They were evidence that your soul still recognized what love should not require you to live without. Many women have been taught to measure strength by how much pain they can carry quietly. But there is another kind of strength. The strength to stop carrying what is breaking you. The strength to say, this is too heavy to keep calling love. The strength to say, I cannot keep being the only person trying to make this honest. The strength to say, I am allowed to need more than fragments. The strength to let tears fall without turning them into an apology. You do not owe anyone an apology for being wounded by what wounded you. You do not owe anyone a softer version of the truth so they can stay comfortable. You do not owe anyone continued access to your inner life because they once meant everything to you. And you do not owe your past self hatred for surviving in the only way she knew how. This is important because healing will require you to grieve without self-cruelty. You may have moments when you remember things you tolerated and shame rises. The message you sent after being ignored, the apology you gave when you were the one hurt, the explanation you wrote with shaking hand, the night you accepted a weak excuse because the truth felt too unbearable, the way you stayed available After being treated like an option, you may look back and feel exposed. But do not confuse regret with permission to despise yourself. Regret can teach you. Shame tries to bury you. Regret says, I see what happened more clearly now. Shame says something is wrong with me. Regret says I will choose differently next time. Shame says I cannot trust myself ever again. Regret can become wisdom. Shame becomes another prison. So when the tears come with memories of your own self-abandonment, hold yourself differently. Say, I was trying to be loved with the tools I had. Say, I did not know then what I know now in my body. Say, I can be accountable without being cruel to myself. Say, I can mourn the ways I left myself and still welcome myself home. This is how dignity is rebuilt. Not through perfection, through return. A woman returns to herself every time she tells the truth and stays gentle. Every time she chooses rest over rumination. Every time she refuses to use longing as a reason to reopen the wound. Every time she stops making someone else's confusion more important than her own clarity. Every time she says, I can understand why he acted that way, but I no longer have to organize my life around his limitations. That sentence matters because compassionate women often feel guilty for naming harm. They fear that if they stop explaining him, they are being unfair. But you can be fair and still be free. You can acknowledge his pain without volunteering to be the place where it keeps repeating. You can wish him healing without staying near the version of him that harmed you. You can release resentment without reopening access. You can forgive internally while still protecting yourself externally. Forgiveness does not require you to hand someone the knife again and call it grace. Grace without wisdom can become self-neglect, and you are learning wisdom now. Maybe not the kind of wisdom you wanted. Maybe not the kind that came gently. Maybe this wisdom arrived through a locked door, an unanswered message, a betrayal, a silence that made your mind ache, a goodbye that never had the decency to be spoken clearly. But still, wisdom is arriving. It is arriving every time you realize that tears are not a verdict against your strength. It is arriving every time you stop saying, I cried, so I must be weak, and begin saying, I cried because my heart was asking for care. It is arriving every time you understand that the woman who cried is not embarrassing. She is the woman who survived the parts no one saw. She is the woman who loved through uncertainty. She is the woman who carried a body of hope through a relationship already hollowed out. She is the woman who tried to stitch meaning over wounds caused by refusal, not confusion. She is the woman who finally reached the edge of pretending. And now she deserves tenderness, not judgment, not pressure. Tenderness. Let her cry. Let her breathe. Let her sleep. Let her be quiet. Let her stop explaining. Let her eat something nourishing. Let her put the phone away. Let her walk into another room when memory becomes too loud. Let her say, I am still healing, without making that sentence a failure. There is no shame in needing time to become whole after being emotionally fragmented. There is no shame in needing space after being kept in uncertainty. There is no shame in needing solitude after being consumed. There is no shame in grieving a person you cannot return to. There is no shame in missing someone and still knowing they were not safe for you. That is one of the hardest truths. You can miss someone who was not safe. You can love someone who was not good for your peace. You can feel tenderness towards someone who betrayed your trust. You can remember beauty inside a story that also caused harm. Healing does not demand that you make the past ugly in order to leave it. Healing only asks that you stop making the beautiful parts more important than the whole truth. The whole truth is where freedom begins. The whole truth says there were moments that mattered, and also the pattern wounded me. The whole truth says I loved deeply. And also, I abandoned myself in places I should have protected myself. The whole truth says I wanted it to work. And also, wanting cannot build what two people are not equally willing to honor. The whole truth says I cried. And also, my tears did not make me weak. Perhaps your tears are part of the way your inner life is making room for reality. Because reality takes space. It cannot enter a heart crowded with fantasy, excuses, fear, and the old hunger to be chosen by someone unavailable. Reality may enter slowly. First as discomfort, then as grief, then as anger, then as clarity. Then, eventually, as peace. Not perfect peace. Not instant peace, but a steadier ground beneath you. A place inside where you can finally say, I know what happened. I may not know every detail, but I know enough about how it affected me. I know I was not cared for with consistency. I know my body was tired. I know my mind was trapped in loops because honesty was withheld. I know I kept hoping because the truth felt too painful. I know I cried because something in me was asking to be free. That knowing is powerful. It may not remove the ache immediately, but it begins to remove the confusion. And sometimes confusion is what keeps pain alive the longest. Not love, not memory, confusion. The constant mental labor of trying to make a harmful pattern into a loving story. The constant attempt to make silence speak. The constant hope that if you can understand it differently, it will hurt less. But maybe it does not need a more generous interpretation. Maybe it needs a more honest one. Maybe the silence was not mysterious. Maybe the inconsistency was not romantic. Maybe the ambiguity was not depth. Maybe the delayed choosing was not timing. Maybe the crumbs were not signs. Maybe the truth was simple and your heart was not ready to survive its simplicity. That happens. Sometimes the truth is not complicated. It is only painful. And a painful truth can take time to accept because accepting it means grieving the story you use to protect yourself. So do not rush yourself, but do not lie to yourself either. Move gently, but move truthfully. Cry when you need to, but after the tears, return to what you know. Return to the evidence. Return to the pattern. Return to your body. Return to the woman who kept feeling uneasy for a reason. Return to the part of you that whispered, "This is hurting me," long before you were ready to say it aloud. That part of you is not weak. That part of you is wise. And she is still here. She may be tired. She may be bruised. She may be afraid to trust again, but she is here, and she is asking you not to abandon her in order to chase someone who already showed you how carelessly he could abandon you. Listen to her. Not with panic, with reverence. Because the woman inside you who cried is also the woman inside you who knows how to heal. She does not need you to become hard. She needs you to become honest. She does not need you to stop loving forever. She needs you to stop calling self-erasure love. She does not need you to deny the past. She needs you to stop living there. And slowly, as you listen, you may notice something. The tears may still come, but they will begin to change. They will not always feel like collapse. Sometimes they will feel like release. Sometimes they will feel like cleansing. Sometimes they will feel like farewell. Sometimes they will feel like the last water leaving a wound that has finally begun to close. And one day, perhaps quietly, you will cry and realize you are not crying for him in the same way anymore. You are crying for yourself, for what you survived, for what you gave, for what you lost, for what you are finally choosing to protect. And that kind of crying carries dignity. It says, I mattered here, even if I was not honored. It says, my love had value, even if it was mishandled. It says, my pain is real, even if no apology ever arrives. It says, I can grieve without giving my future back to the person who broke my peace. That is not weakness. That is a woman becoming whole enough to believe her own tears. There is a point in grief where the tears begin to reveal something you did not expect. They do not only reveal how much you loved, they reveal how long you were lonely inside the love. That is a harder truth to face. Because if you admit you were lonely while still attached, then you must also admit that the relationship was not giving you what your heart kept trying to believe it was giving you. You may have had moments of connection, moments of warmth, moments where everything felt almost right. But then came the distance, the uncertainty, the silence that made your stomach tighten, the emotional absence that forced you to become both the woman in the relationship and the woman comforting herself through it. And maybe that is why you cried so deeply, because you were not only grieving abandonment after it happened, you were grieving the abandonment that had already been happening slowly. The unanswered questions, the half presence, the way your heart kept reaching towards someone who only met you when it was convenient, the way you learned to live on emotional leftovers and still call yourself grateful. Many women do this quietly. They do not announce it. They do not always know how to explain it. They keep moving through life while carrying a private ache that has no simple name. They are not single in the obvious sense, but they are alone in all the places that matter. Alone with their questions, alone with their fear, alone with their intuition, alone with the truth they are not ready to say, alone with the knowledge that they are giving more life to the connection than the other person is giving back. And when the tears finally come, they may sound like weakness to an outside ear, but inside they are testimony. They are saying, I have been lonely for a long time. They are saying, I have been emotionally underfed. They are saying, I have been holding a relationship that was not holding me. They are saying, I have been trying to make a home out of someone's occasional willingness. That is not Weakness, that is recognition. And recognition can hurt because it removes the last beautiful excuse. It asks you to see the difference between being occasionally comforted and being consistently cared for. It asks you to see the difference between someone missing you and someone honoring you. It asks you to see the difference between being emotionally kept around and being fully chosen. Because some people do not choose you, but they do not release you either. They keep you close enough to feel wanted, but not secure. Close enough to hope, but not rest. Close enough to continue giving, but not close enough to receive a real commitment. Close enough to confuse your heart, but not close enough to protect it. And this is one of the cruelest emotional positions a woman can live in. Not fully loved, not fully released, not fully claimed, not fully free. Left to read silence like it is a language. Left to stitch meaning over every small gesture. Left to wonder whether the problem is timing, fear, trauma, stress, distance, or simply the painful truth that someone enjoys your love without intending to honor its cost. A woman can lose years in that place, not because she is foolish, because ambiguity has a way of feeding hope while starving dignity. It gives just enough to keep the heart reaching. Just enough apology, just enough tenderness, just enough return, just enough memory of the beginning, just enough possibility. And when you are hungry for clarity, even fragments can feel like a meal, but fragments do not nourish a woman. They keep her alive in the relationship while slowly weakening her relationship with herself. This is why crying can feel so confusing after ambiguity, because part of you is mourning something you cannot even fully explain. How do you grieve someone who was there and not there? How do you mourn a love that had warmth but no structure? How do you explain heartbreak over a relationship that never gave you the dignity of being fully named? How do you tell people you are devastated when even you are still trying to understand what exactly you lost? You lost the hope. You lost the imagined future. You lost the version of him that appeared in moments and disappeared in patterns. You lost the woman you became while trying to make uncertainty feel sacred. You lost time. You lost peace. You lost the ease of trusting your own perception. And maybe most painfully, you lost the illusion that loving harder could make someone love better. That loss deserves tears, not shame, tears, because there is grief in realizing love alone cannot make a person ready. There's grief in realizing your patience did not become safety. There is grief in realizing your loyalty did not become commitment. There is grief in realizing your softness was not handled with the same care with which it was offered. A painful but clarifying truth is that some women blame themselves because blaming themselves gives them an illusion of control. If it was your fault, maybe you can fix it. If you were too emotional, maybe you can become calmer. If you ask too much, maybe you can need less. If you were not attractive enough, interesting enough, patient enough, spiritual enough, available enough, then maybe there is still something you can change to make the love become safe. Self-blame can feel cruel, but sometimes it is the mind's desperate attempt to avoid helplessness. Because the truth is harder. You cannot make someone choose you with honor if they benefit from keeping you uncertain. You cannot love someone into emotional courage. You cannot explain your pain into someone who is committed to avoiding accountability. You cannot become small enough to make an unavailable person safe. That is a truth many women resist because it removes the fantasy of control. But it also removes the burden. It means you can stop searching your personality for the reasons someone mishandled your heart. It means you can stop editing your needs down to nothing. It means you can stop treating your tears like evidence that you failed the relationship. Some relationships fail because one person keeps asking for truth and the other keeps offering confusion. Some relationships fail because one person is trying to build and the other is trying to benefit. Some relationships fail because love is present in feeling, but absent in character. And character matters. Consistency matters. Emotional responsibility matters. A person's affection may touch your heart, but their character determines whether your heart is safe in their hands. That is a truth worth remembering because many women are taught to treasure feelings so much that they ignore a pattern. They ask, did he love me? But sometimes the more healing question is, what did his love require me to survive? Did it require silence? Did it require waiting? Did it require shrinking? Did it require forgiving without repair? Did it require ignoring your body? Did it require staying loyal to potential while neglecting reality? Did it require you to become less alive? If love required you to abandon yourself, then even if parts of it were real, it was not whole. And you are allowed to grieve something real without returning to something incomplete. You are allowed to say, there were moments I loved, but the pattern was harming me. You are allowed to say, I miss him, but I do not miss who I had to become to keep him. You are allowed to say, I cry, but I will not let tears persuade me to betray myself again. This is where healing becomes more honest, not easier, more honest. Because in the beginning, healing may feel like trying to stop thinking about him, but deeper healing asks you to think about yourself again, not obsessively, not harshly, but tenderly. Who were you before you began measuring your worth through his response? What did you enjoy before waiting became part of your daily rhythm? What friendships did you neglect because your mind was crowded with uncertainty? What dreams became quiet because so much energy went into trying to feel chosen? What parts of your womanhood did you hide because you feared they would be too much? What would your life look like if peace became more important than being desired by someone inconsistent? These questions are the beginning of return. Because return is not simply leaving him. Return is coming back to your own life. It is taking back your mornings from the phone, taking back your evenings from rumination, taking back your body from constant tension, taking back your voice from fear, taking back your tenderness from the places that used it without protecting it. And yes, this may make you cry too, because sometimes a woman does not know how far she has drifted from herself until she starts walking back. She notices how tired she is, how much she has tolerated, how little she has rested, how often she has confused survival with strength, how many times she has said, I'm fine, when what she really meant was, I am functioning, but I am not okay. If that is you, let this part of the journey be slow. You do not have to rebuild everything in 1 week. You do not have to become radiant immediately. You do not have to turn heartbreak into a brand new identity before you have had time to breathe. You are allowed to be in process without performing progress. Some days, healing will look like not texting. Some days, it will look like crying and still cooking yourself a meal. Some days, it will look like remembering the truth when loneliness tries to make the past look softer than it was. Some days, it will look like choosing not to explain yourself to people who do not understand ambiguous grief. Some days, it will look like sitting quietly with your own heart and saying, I know it hurt. I am here. That sentence may become a shelter. I am here. Because part of what betrayal teaches the body is abandonment. Someone left emotionally. Someone disappeared. Someone withheld truth. Someone benefited from your love and did not honor its weight. Someone made you feel replaceable, optional, forgettable, easy to silence. So healing must include the opposite, presence. Your presence with yourself, your refusal to disappear from your own life because someone else disappeared from their responsibility. Your decision to become a safe place for the part of you that was left alone with unanswered questions. When you cry, do not leave yourself too. Do not mock your tears. Do not rush them. Do not call yourself foolish for having human attachment. Do not turn your pain into another place where you are abandoned. Stay. Put your hand on your chest if you need to. Breathe slowly. Name what is true. This is grief. This is withdrawal. This is disappointment. This is shame leaving. This is my body releasing a pattern. This is not proof that I am weak. This is proof that I am feeling something I no longer need to hide. There is power in naming. What remains unnamed often rules from the shadows. But what you can name, you can begin to hold differently. And maybe what you are feeling is not only heartbreak, maybe it is emotional withdrawal from a cycle of uncertainty. Maybe it is grief over the years. Maybe it is anger that has not found safe expression yet. Maybe it is humiliation from being vulnerable with someone who did not honor that vulnerability. Maybe it is fear of starting again. Maybe it is the ache of realizing you were loyal to a future that was never truly being built by two people. Each feeling needs a different kind of care. Grief needs space. Anger needs truth. Shame needs tenderness. Fear needs steadiness. Loneliness needs safe connection. Exhaustion needs rest. Longing needs reality beside it. Not cruelty, reality. Because longing, when left alone, can become a storyteller. It will tell you only the soft parts. The first conversations, the rare tenderness, the moments that felt destined, the way he smiled, the way he held you, the things he said when he wanted closeness. But reality must sit beside longing and tell the rest. The silence, the inconsistency, the emotional hunger, the self-doubt, the nights you cried alone, the way you became afraid to ask simple questions, the way your peace depended on his mood, the way your dignity kept paying the cost of his uncertainty. This is not to make you angry forever. It is to keep you honest long enough to heal. Because a woman can relapse into a fantasy when she remembers only the tenderness. She needs the whole truth, not to punish herself, but to protect herself. The whole truth is not an enemy of love. The whole truth is an enemy of self-abandonment. And at some point, the whole truth may sound like this. I loved him, but I was lonely. I wanted him, but I was not safe. I hoped, but I was tired. I cried, but I was waking up. I miss him, but I cannot keep choosing the version of myself that existed in his uncertainty. That is a sacred sentence. I cannot keep choosing the version of myself that existed in his uncertainty, because that version of you deserves compassion. But she does not have to remain in charge of your life. She was surviving. Now you are learning to live. She was waiting. Now you are learning to return. She was reading silence. Now you are learning to believe patterns. She was trying to be enough. Now you are learning that you were never meant to audition for basic care. There's a difference between becoming guarded and becoming discerning. Guarded says, I will never let anyone close again. Discerning says, I will not confuse closeness with safety again. Guarded says, I cannot trust love. Discerning says, I will let love prove itself through consistency. Guarded says, my softness is dangerous. Discerning says, my softness is precious, and precious things deserve protection. You do not have to become cold to become wise. You do not have to lose your tenderness to gain your dignity. You do not have to punish future love for what past love failed to become. But you do need to learn how to stand with yourself when your heart is moved. You need to learn that chemistry is not enough. Words are not enough. Apologies are not enough. A person missing you is not enough. A person returning is not enough. There must be repair. There must be accountability. There must be clarity. There must be consistency. There must be a pattern that lets your nervous system rest. And until that exists, your longing must not be allowed to make decisions your dignity will have to recover from. This is how self-respect grows, not by denying desire, by refusing to let desire outrank truth, not by denying tears, by refusing to let tears become permission to re-enter harm, not by denying love, by refusing to call partial care enough for a whole woman. And you are a whole woman, even if you feel fragmented right now, even if betrayal made you question your worth, even if silence made you feel invisible, even if being unchosen made an old wound open again, even if you cried until your face changed, even if you still do not know how to explain the ache, you are still whole in value, even while healing in pieces. That is important. Healing in pieces does not mean you are broken beyond repair. It means you are gathering yourself honestly, piece by piece. The piece of you that stopped singing, the piece of you that stopped trusting your intuition, the piece of you that kept apologizing, the piece of you that waited by the phone, the piece of you that felt ashamed of needing reassurance, the piece of you that believed being chosen by him would finally prove something about you. Gather her. Do not scold her. Gather her. Tell her you do not have to prove your worth through someone else's capacity to see it. Tell her you do not have to keep crying in places that only taught you to doubt yourself. Tell her you are allowed to want love, but you are no longer allowed to abandon yourself for access to it. Tell her, we are coming home now. That is the work. quiet, sacred, daily, unseen. The world may not notice. He may not notice. The people who told you to move on may not understand. But something inside you will notice. Your body will notice the first time you choose peace over panic. Your heart will notice the first time you let a wave pass without contacting him. Your soul will notice the first time you tell the truth without collapsing into shame. Your dignity will notice the first time you choose yourself while still crying. And one day, the woman you are becoming will look back at the woman who cried and feel tenderness, not embarrassment. She will understand that those tears were not proof of weakness. They were proof that the false story could no longer hold. They were proof that the body wanted freedom. They were proof that the heart had carried too much in silence. They were proof that the soul was ready to stop surviving on fragments. And she will bless those tears, not because the pain was good, but because the tears helped her stop lying to herself, because the tears helped her feel what she had minimized, because the tears helped her release what her dignity could no longer carry, because the tears watered the ground where her self-respect began to grow again. So cry if you need to, but do not bow your head in shame while you do. Lift your face gently, even if it is wet, even if it tremble, even if no one else understands. Let the tears fall from a place of truth and remind yourself, I am not weak because I cried. I am not foolish because I loved. I am not less worthy because someone failed to choose me with care. I am not behind because healing is taking time. I am not broken because I am grieving. I am returning. And return is not always loud. Sometimes return sounds like a woman crying in the dark and still deciding not to abandon herself anymore. There is a kind of healing that begins when a woman stops asking, why wasn't I enough? And begins asking, why did I let someone's inability to love me become the measure of my value? That question does not arrive easily. It usually comes after many tears, after the nights of replaying old conversations, after the mornings of waking up heavy, after the moments of checking for signs and finding only more silence, after the shame of still caring, after the ache of imagining him moving through life as though nothing sacred was lost. At first, pain makes everything point back to him. His choices, his silence, his betrayal, his absence, his mixed signals, his failure to choose. But eventually, if healing is allowed to deepen, the focus begins to shift. Not because what he did no longer matters. It matters. But because your life cannot remain organized around the emotional limitations of someone who did not know how to honor you, at some point your soul begins to whisper, come back. Come back from the unanswered questions. Come back from the fantasy of one perfect explanation. Come back from the place where you keep waiting for someone else's accountability to give you permission to heal. Come back from the mirror of rejection. Come back from measuring your beauty, depth, worth, and womanhood by the hands that failed to hold them carefully. This return may make you cry too, because returning to yourself after betrayal can feel like walking through rooms that were neglected while you were busy trying to be loved. You may find your confidence dusty, your joy quiet, your body tired, your friendships distant, your dreams paused, your intuition bruised, your self-respect sitting in a corner, waiting for you to stop choosing against it. And when you see all that, you may feel grief, not dramatic grief, a quiet grief, the grief of realizing how much of yourself you put on hold, the grief of seeing how often your day rose and fell with someone else's attention, the grief of remembering how many times you abandoned your own peace to preserve a connection that was not preserving you. But even this grief is not weakness. It is honesty. It is the beginning of repair, because you cannot rebuild what you are still pretending was never damaged. A painful but clarifying truth is that betrayal often turns a woman's attention into a prison. She studies the person who hurt her. She studies his behavior, his absence, his new life, his old words, his tone, his last message, his online presence, his possible regret, his possible reasons. She becomes an investigator of someone else's emotional world while her own inner life sits unfed. And this is understandable. The mind is trying to find safety. It wants a clear answer. It wants to know where the danger began. It wants to know whether the love was real. It wants to know whether she was blind, used, replaced, or simply unlucky. But there comes a moment when the search for answers becomes another form of self-abandonment, not because you do not deserve answers. You do. But because some people will never give enough truth to repay what their silence cost you. Some people will leave you with fragments and expect you to build your own closure from broken pieces. Some people will never name the damage because naming it would require them to face themselves. And if you keep waiting for that kind of person to become emotionally honest before you begin healing, you may keep your own life suspended in someone else's immaturity. Closure, for many women, begins with a painful sentence. I may never receive the apology that matches the wound. That sentence can make the body tremble because there's something in the heart that wants the person who caused the pain to finally see it. Not casually, not vaguely, but fully. You want them to understand the nights you lost sleep, the way your body carried anxiety, the way your confidence changed, the way you questioned yourself, the way their silence became a language you had to survive, the way their inconsistency made you feel chosen one day and disposable the next. You want them to know, but here is the difficult truth. Your pain does not become real only when they admit it. Your wound does not become valid only when they apologize. Your tears do not become meaningful only when they regret causing them. You are allowed to believe your own experience. You are allowed to say, this harmed me, even if they insist they did not mean to. You are allowed to say, this was not love in a form my soul could survive, even if there were beautiful moments. You are allowed to say, I cried because I was being emotionally stretched beyond what was healthy, even if no one else saw it. That is not weakness. That is self-witness. And self-witness is one of the most important parts of healing, because when someone denies, minimizes, avoids, or disappears, the abandoned heart often begins to doubt itself. It asks, was it really that bad? Did I exaggerate? Am I too sensitive? Did I misunderstand? Was I asking for too much? But the body remembers. The body remembers the tension. The body remembers waiting. The body remembers the ache after reading a cold reply. The body remembers the humiliation of trying to explain a need that should not have required a courtroom. The body remembers how small you felt after asking for clarity and receiving confusion. Your body may have cried because it was tired of holding evidence your mind kept trying to dismiss. Sometimes the tears are the body saying, please stop arguing with what I already know. Listen to that. Not with panic, not with shame, with respect, because your body is part of your wisdom. It does not always speak in perfect sentences. Sometimes it speaks through tightness, through exhaustion, through tears, through sleeplessness, through dread, through the heavy feeling you get before sending a message you already know will not be received with care. A woman rebuilding self-trust must learn to honor those signals before they become screams. She must learn that peace is not a luxury. Peace is information. Calm is information. Anxiety is information. Repeated confusion is information. Crying after every conversation is information. Feeling lonely inside someone's attention is information. And when you stop dismissing that information, you stop handing your inner life over to people who keep you emotionally unsafe. There is dignity in believing yourself, not in becoming rigid, not in assuming the worst, not in closing your heart forever, but in no longer requiring absolute proof before you protect your peace. Many women waited for proof he did not care enough, proof he was lying, proof he would not choose them, proof the pattern would not change, proof their discomfort was justified. But how much pain is enough proof? How many nights of crying are enough proof? How many times can your body say, this is hurting me, before you allow that to matter? Sometimes the proof is not a confession. Sometimes the proof is the cost. If loving someone costs you your peace, your self-respect, your sleep, your voice, your emotional steadiness, and your ability to feel at home inside yourself, then something is asking to be examined. Not with hatred, with honesty, because love should deepen your humanity, not dissolve it. Love may challenge you. Love may reveal wounds. Love may require humility, patience, and growth. But love should not require you to become chronically anxious, emotionally starved, ashamed of your needs, and dependent on crumbs to feel alive. That is not love maturing you. That is uncertainty conditioning you. And when you cry after finally admitting that, those tears may feel like mourning, but they are also freedom beginning in the body. A reflective question for the woman listening. What would change if you stopped treating your tears as evidence that you are weak and started treating them as evidence that something in you has been asking for truth? What would change if the next time you cried, you did not say, I hate myself for still feeling this, but instead said, something in me is releasing what I have carried alone? What would change if you stopped asking, why didn't he choose me? And began asking, why is my future still waiting for the approval of someone who could not honor my present? These questions are not meant to rush you. They are meant to bring you back into your own authority. Because betrayal often steals a woman's sense of authority over her own life. She begins waiting to feel chosen, waiting to be explained to, waiting for an apology, waiting for him to realize, waiting for a sign, waiting for the ache to leave. waiting to feel strong enough to move. But sometimes healing begins before you feel ready. Not as a dramatic leap, as one honest choice. You stop checking. You stop asking people what they think he meant. You stop rereading what keeps reopening the wound. You stop telling the story in a way that makes your needs disappear. You stop calling disrespect complicated. You stop treating emotional hunger as proof of love. You stop letting your longing testify against your dignity. And then you begin drinking water again. You begin sleeping without the phone beside your face. You begin making plans that do not depend on whether he reaches out. You begin cleaning the space where your grief has been living. You begin answering your own sadness with care. You begin rebuilding a life where your peace does not need permission from someone else's attention. This may sound ordinary, but ordinary is where healing becomes real. Not in the grand moments when you feel powerful, but in the small moments when you feel weak and still do not betray yourself. The night you cry and do not send the message. The morning you wake with longing and still choose not to search for him. The afternoon you remember something tender and still tell yourself the whole truth. The moment your heart says, maybe just one more conversation, and your dignity says, not with someone who has not shown the capacity to repair, that is strength. Quiet, trembling strength. The kind no one may applaud. The kind that happens with swollen eyes and a tired body. The kind that is not interested in performance. The kind that says, I am still grieving, but I am no longer available to be harmed in the same way. Some women think dignity means they should never have cried in the first place. But dignity is not the absence of tears. Dignity is what you choose after tears. Dignity is when you stop using your pain as a reason to chase the person who caused it. Dignity is when you stop offering unlimited access to someone who treated your heart like a place to visit, not a place to honor. Dignity is when you admit, I still care, without letting that care overrule your truth. Dignity is when you no longer confuse being chosen by him with being restored to yourself. Because being chosen by the wrong person in the wrong way can still cost you your life. Not your physical life, perhaps, but your inner life, your peace, your voice, your laughter, your self-trust, your sense of possibility, your ability to wake up without dread. And no connection is worthy of becoming the graveyard where your spirit disappears. So if the tears came because you finally saw the cost, let them come. Let them mourn the woman who tried so hard. Let them mourn the version of you who waited at the emotional door. Let them mourn the hope that kept dressing pain in softer clothes. Let them mourn the years you cannot get back, but do not let them convince you that your future is gone. Time was lost. Yes. Energy was spent. Yes. Tenderness was mishandled. Yes. Trust was damaged. Yes. But you are not over. You are not ruined. You are not too late. You are not less of a woman because someone made you feel unchosen. You are not behind because healing has a slower rhythm than your pride would prefer. You are not weak because your heart still needs time to stop reaching. You are a woman learning to return to her own life after being emotionally displaced. And that return deserves reverence. There may be days when the grief feels undignified. When you cry in the car, when you cry in the shower, when you cry quietly beside someone who has no idea what memory just touched. When you cry because you saw a woman being loved plainly and wondered why you had to beg for what looked so natural for someone else. That kind of pain can make you feel small, but it does not make you small. It means your heart is recognizing what it needed and did not receive. And recognition is painful before it becomes guidance. Let it guide you. Let it teach you what kind of love your body can rest in. Let it teach you that secrecy, ambiguity, emotional famine, half promises, and private tenderness without public honor are not enough. Let it teach you that being desired is not the same as being protected. Let it teach you that chemistry without character can leave a woman more lonely than solitude. Let it teach you that your longing is real, but it is not always wise. Let it teach you that tears may soften you, but truth must steady you. Because healing needs both tenderness and truth. If you only have tenderness, you may keep making excuses. If you only have truth without tenderness, you may become cruel to yourself. But together, tenderness and truth can help you walk out of the old story without destroying the woman who lived there. Tenderness says, "Of course you cried. It hurt." Truth says, "But you cannot go back to what keeps hurting you." Tenderness says, "You love deeply." Truth says, "But depth without reciprocity becomes depletion." Tenderness says, "You miss him." Truth says, "But missing someone does not make them safe." Tenderness says, "You stayed because you hoped." Truth says, "Now you must leave because you know," and knowing changes responsibility. Once you know, you may still grieve. You may still tremble. You may still cry. But you can no longer honestly pretend that returning to the pattern will heal the wound the pattern created. That is one of the hardest parts of awakening. The old comfort is no longer innocent. The old message is no longer harmless. The old door is no longer simply familiar. You know now. You know what it costs. You know how long it takes to recover after one small return becomes another season of confusion. You know how quickly one conversation can pull you back into hope. You know how your body reacts when uncertainty begins again. You know the difference between peace and the temporary relief of being wanted for a moment. And because you know your healing asks you to protect yourself differently, not perfectly, differently. If you stumble, return. If you cry, return. If you miss him, return. If you dream about him, return. If you feel lonely, return. Return to the truth. Return to your breath. Return to your body. Return to the woman who has already survived so much and deserves not to be dragged back into a story that keeps asking her to bleed quietly. There is grace in return, not the kind of grace that excuses harm. The kind of grace that helps you come home after abandoning yourself again and again. You can come home. You can come home after a weak moment. You can come home after a memory. You can come home after tears. You can come home after realizing you still wanted an apology. You can come home after admitting you still love parts of him. You can come home without shame because healing is not proven you never fall. Healing is learning where to go after you fall. And the place you must go now is not back to the person who left you confused. It is back to yourself, back to your own name, back to your own body, back to your own dignity, back to your own unfinished life. A life that still needs your attention. A life that has been waiting beneath the grief. A life with mornings that can become peaceful again. A life with friendships that can hold you. A life with work, creativity, laughter, silence, rest, faith, renewal, and small joys that are not dependent on someone else's inconsistency. It may not feel possible yet. That is okay. Possibility often returns quietly. First as one calm hour, then as one night without checking, then as one day where the thought of him comes, but does not take the whole day, then as one moment in the mirror where you do not blame the woman looking back, then as one breath where you realize, I am still here. And that matters. You are still here after the confusion, after the tears, after the silence, after the betrayal, after the emotional exhaustion, after the nights when your mind would not stop searching for answers. You are still here, not untouched, not unchanged, but here. And maybe that is where strength begins again. Not in never crying, but in remaining present with yourself after everything that tried to pull you away. So the next time tears come, do not rush to hide them from yourself. Let them fall. Let them tell the truth. Let them soften what shame tried to harden. Let them release what your pride tried to carry. Let them remind you that you are not a machine, not a performance, not a woman made only to endure. You are a soul, a heart, a body, a life, a woman worthy of care. And no, you are not weak because you cried. You are becoming honest enough to stop confusing survival with love. You are becoming brave enough to stop waiting for closure from someone who used silence as an escape. You are becoming grounded enough to let reality speak louder than longing. You are becoming tender enough to grieve and strong enough not to return to what made you disappear. That is not weakness. That is the quiet beginning of freedom. There is a tender kind of courage in admitting I cried because I wanted to be chosen by someone who kept making me feel optional. That sentence is not easy to say. It touches pride. It touches shame. It touches the private places where a grown woman still wonders why love could feel so close and still not become safe. Because being unchosen does not only hurt the heart, it can make a woman feel as if she has been quietly evaluated and found lacking, even when she knows better, even when she has lived enough life to understand that another person's inability to love with maturity is not the same as her being unlovable. Still, the wound asks questions. Was I too available? Was I too honest? Was I too patient? Was I not exciting enough? Was I too deep? Did I give too much? Did I ask too late? Did I stay so long that I taught him my pain had no consequence? And beneath all those questions, there is often one deeper ache. If I had been more valuable to him, would he have treated me differently? That is the kind of thought that can bring a woman to tears in silence. Not because she believes it fully, but because betrayal has a way of making lies sound intimate. It whispers directly into the places where you already fear you are not enough. It finds the old wound and speaks its language. If you have ever been abandoned before, ignored before, replaced before, compared before, emotionally overlooked before, or made to feel like love had to be earned before, then being unchosen by someone you loved can feel larger than the relationship itself. It can feel like history repeating itself. It can feel like the old ache saying, "See, again." And that is why your tears may have seemed bigger than the situation to someone else. They were not just about one person. They were about the pattern your body recognized. They were about the young part of you that still remembers having to be pleasing to receive affection. They were about the woman in you who is tired of being strong in public and unseen in private. They were about the old fear that maybe love always comes with waiting, proving, shrinking, and hoping. But let truth enter gently here. Someone failing to choose you with care is not proof that you were not worth choosing. It may be proof that they did not have the courage, capacity, maturity, integrity, or desire to honor what your love required. That distinction matters. Because if you make their inability your identity, you will keep trying to heal by becoming more acceptable to people who were never prepared to love you well. You will think healing means becoming prettier, quieter, more impressive, more detached, more useful, more patient, more mysterious, less emotional, less needy. But healing is not becoming a version of yourself that someone emotionally unavailable would finally approve of. Healing is becoming the woman who no longer abandons herself to be approved of. There is dignity in that. There is grief in it too. Because the part of you that wanted to be chosen may still ache. She may still wonder what it would have felt like if he had turned toward you fully. If he had been honest, if he had protected the bond, if he had said, "I know I hurt you, and I want to repair this." If he had chosen you, not only when it was convenient, but when love required humility, discipline, and emotional courage, you may cry over that imagined version of him. You may cry over the conversation that never came, the apology that never reached the depth of the wound, the clarity that was withheld, the tenderness that appeared in moments but never became a home. And you may need to tell yourself the truth. I am not only grieving what happened, I am grieving what never happened. I am grieving the apology I deserved. I am grieving the commitment that never came. I am grieving the version of love I kept preparing for. I am grieving the future my heart named before reality agreed. I am grieving the woman I became while waiting. That grief is real, and it deserves respect. Because sometimes the hardest thing to mourn is not a memory. It is an expectation, a future, a possibility, a whole life that existed only in the quiet rooms of your imagination, but still shaped your choices, your patience, your loyalty, your hope. You imagined being settled. You imagined being safe. You imagined not having to ask where you stood. You imagined being loved without becoming smaller. You imagined finally exhaling. And when that future disappears, people may tell you to move on as if you only lost a person. But you know you lost more than that. You lost the version of your life that you had already started emotionally preparing for. You lost the image of yourself in that life. You lost the peace you thought was waiting after all the uncertainty. And when you cry over that, you are not weak. You are mourning an invisible architecture, a house inside the heart, a house you were decorating with hope while the other person had not even agreed to build the foundation. That realization can hurt deeply, but it can also save you, because a woman begins to reclaim her life when she stops furnishing a future that someone else refuses to enter honestly. She stops living inside, maybe. Maybe he will change. Maybe he will finally explain. Maybe he was just scared. Maybe he will see my value when I stop being available. Maybe he will regret it. Maybe he will come back different. Maybe the silence means he is thinking. Maybe the distance is not what it feels like. Maybe can become a cage when reality keeps being postponed. And sometimes the tears come because the cage door is open, but leaving still hurts. Freedom is not always painless. Sometimes freedom feels like withdrawal. Sometimes it feels like loneliness. Sometimes it feels like grief with no applause. Sometimes it feels like sitting in your own life without the familiar ache that used to give your days a strange kind of direction. When you have spent so long organizing your emotional life around someone's absence, peace can feel disorienting. You may not know what to do with a quiet morning. You may not know how to sit through an evening without checking. You may not know who you are when you are not waiting, interpreting, hoping, hurting, forgiving, and trying again. That does not mean you belonged in the pain. It means your body is learning a new rhythm. It means your identity is detaching from survival. It means your nervous system is discovering that calm does not have to be followed by abandonment. Give yourself time. A woman does not rebuild herself by command. She rebuilds herself through repeated kindness, truthful reflection, and small acts of protection. She rebuilds herself by becoming trustworthy to herself again. And self-trust may begin very quietly. It may begin when you say, "I will not check tonight," and you keep that promise. It may begin when you say, "I will not explain my pain again to someone who has already shown me they do not know how to hold it," and you stay silent. It may begin when you say, "I will not use loneliness as a reason to reopen a door that cost me my peace," and you let the loneliness pass through you without turning it into action. It may begin when you say, "I will not call myself weak for missing him," and you comfort yourself instead. That is where dignity grows. Not in dramatic declarations, in the hidden moments when you choose yourself without an audience. A deeper truth about tears is that they often come when the self is being restored. The old self is grieving. The new self is learning to stand. And for a while, both may live inside you. One part of you still longs. Another part knows. One part remembers his tenderness. Another part remembers the pattern. One part wants to send the message. Another part says, "Not at the cost of our peace." One part misses being wanted. Another part is learning that being wanted is not the same as being cherished. This inner conflict can be exhausting, but it is not failure. It is transition. It is the space between attachment and freedom. It is the soul learning not to confuse familiar pain with home. And if you cry in that space, let the tears be honored. They are not signs that you are going backward. They may be signs that you are no longer numb. You are feeling the cost. You are feeling the truth. You are feeling the sorrow of release. You are feeling the old hope loosening its grip. And loosening can hurt. Anything held tightly for a long time leaves tenderness when it is finally released. There may be days when you feel angry at yourself for caring so much. But maybe the task is not to care less. Maybe the task is to care more wisely. To care for yourself with the same devotion you once poured into someone who could not meet you fully. To care for your body, your rest, your peace, your appetite, your voice, your future, your friendships, your relationship with your own reflection, your ability to feel safe inside your own life. What if the love you kept trying to give him is now being asked to return home? What if your tenderness is not wrong, only misplaced? What if your loyalty is not foolish, only in need of boundaries? What if your tears are not evidence of weakness, but the sound of love being called back from a place where it was not protected? This is not about becoming selfish. It is about becoming whole. A woman who has betrayed herself for connection may feel guilty when she begins choosing herself. At first, self-respect can feel like betrayal, because if you are used to overgiving, balance feels cold. If you are used to chasing clarity, silence feels cruel. If you are used to being endlessly available, boundaries feel harsh. If you are used to making excuses, honesty feels unkind. But not every uncomfortable thing is wrong. Sometimes discomfort is simply what it feels like to stop repeating an old wound. Sometimes guilt is only the withdrawal symptom of self-abandonment. Sometimes grief is the price of finally choosing truth over fantasy. And sometimes tears come because your dignity is returning and your old patterns are afraid they are losing control. Let them lose control. Let the pattern weaken. Let the habit of chasing become less powerful. Let the fantasy become less convincing. Let the silence stop feeling like a puzzle and start being recognized as information. Let your own peace become more important than being chosen by someone who made you feel small. There is dignity in no longer auditioning. No longer auditioning to be loved. No longer auditioning to be chosen. No longer auditioning to be treated with basic consistency. No longer presenting evidence of your worth to someone who had access to it and still did not honor it, because your worth was never waiting for his recognition. It existed before him. It remained during him. It survives after him. The relationship may have shaken your sense of it, but it did not erase it. A woman does not become less valuable because someone met her depth with shallowness. She does not become less worthy because someone treated her loyalty like a resource instead of a gift. She does not become less lovable because someone preferred comfort over commitment. She does not become less beautiful because someone failed to look with reverence. She does not become less whole because she was mishandled. And she does not become weak because she cried over the mishandling. Tears do not reduce a woman. Sometimes they return her to scale. They remind her, this was not small. They remind her, I was carrying too much. They remind her, I cannot continue pretending this did not wound me. They remind her, my heart has limits, and those limits deserve honor. That is important because many women are praised for having no limits, for being endlessly patient, endlessly forgiving, endlessly understanding, endlessly available, endlessly strong. But endlessness is not love. A woman is not a spiritual warehouse for someone else's immaturity. She is not a place where every inconsistency can be stored, every wound excused, every absence interpreted, every betrayal softened. She is a human being. She has a heart. She has a body. She has years she cannot get back. She has a nervous system that remembers what she keeps trying to minimize. She has a soul that cannot live forever in uncertainty without becoming tired. And when she cries, perhaps it is the whole of her being saying, I am not endless. There is wisdom in that limit. There is grace in that boundary. There is life in finally admitting I cannot keep pouring myself into what does not pour back. A reflective question for the woman listening. Where have you mistaken endurance for devotion? Where have you believed that if you could just survive enough pain, love would finally become safe? Where have you stayed loyal to potential while abandoning the reality of your own exhaustion? These questions may make you uncomfortable, but they are not here to shame you. They are here to free you from the idea that suffering is proof of love. Some women were taught that love means staying no matter what. But mature love requires truth. Mature love requires reciprocity. Mature love requires responsibility. Mature love does not ask one person to bleed quietly while the other person remains comfortably unclear. And when love lacks those things, grief is appropriate. Tears are appropriate. Disappointment is appropriate. Anger may be appropriate too. Many women are more comfortable crying than being angry. They can grieve, but they feel guilty naming the injustice. They can say, I miss him more easily than they can say, what happened to me was unfair. But anger, held wisely, can be part of dignity returning, not rage that destroys, not bitterness that hardens, but clean anger, the kind that says, I deserved honesty. I deserved care. I deserve not to be kept in uncertainty. I deserve not to be used as emotional comfort without emotional responsibility. I deserve not to be made to feel needy for asking where I stood. That anger can help you stop romanticizing what harmed you. It can stand beside your tears and give them backbone. Because tears without truth can sometimes keep begging, but tears with truth can begin releasing. Let yourself know the difference. You are allowed to be sad. You are allowed to be angry. You are allowed to feel both in the same hour. You can miss him and still know he hurt you. You can remember beauty and still name betrayal. You can cry and still refuse to protect his image at the expense of your reality. This is not cruelty. This is wholeness. Wholeness allows the full truth to exist, not the edited truth, not the truth that makes him innocent and you dramatic, not the truth that makes you foolish and him powerful. The full truth. I loved. I hoped. I stayed. I ignored signs. I was hurt. I deserve better. I am learning. I am returning. That is a whole truth. A truth with grief and responsibility. A truth with tenderness and boundary. A truth with humility and self-respect. And from that truth, a woman can begin again. not instantly, not without ache, but honestly. She can begin by changing what she calls love. She can stop calling inconsistency complicated. She can stop calling emotional hunger passion. She can stop calling anxiety intuition. She can stop calling private tenderness commitment. She can stop calling being needed, being cherished. She can stop calling waiting faith. She can stop calling self-abandonment loyalty. And each time she renames something accurately, another chain loosens. Because language matters. The way you name your pain affects how you heal from it. If you call mistreatment a misunderstanding, you may keep trying to explain. If you call avoidance fear, you may keep trying to comfort. If you call inconsistency depth, you may keep trying to decode. If you call crumbs love, you may keep starving. But if you call a pattern, you can begin to respond differently. If you call harm, you can begin to protect yourself. If you call grief, you can stop pretending you are weak. If you call tears release, you can stop treating them like evidence against your strength. There is peace in accurate naming, not immediate peace, but a peace that begins like a small light. A light that says, I know what this is now. And when you know what something is, you no longer have to keep negotiating with it. You do not have to negotiate with silence. You do not have to negotiate with inconsistency. You do not have to negotiate with betrayal. You do not have to negotiate with someone who wants the benefits of your love, but not the responsibility of honoring it. You can simply say, with a shaking voice, if necessary, this is not where I can become whole. That sentence may make you cry because it is both an ending and a beginning. It ends the fantasy that the wound will become the healer. It begins the possibility that you can be healed outside the place that broke your peace. It ends the waiting. It begins the return. It ends the negotiation. It begins the self-respect. And maybe that is why this hurts so much. Because you are not only losing a person, you are losing the illusion that pain will eventually be rewarded if you endure it beautifully enough. But pain is not a payment plan for love. You do not have to suffer long enough to be chosen. You do not have to prove your depth by how much you can tolerate. You do not have to make your tears acceptable by turning them into growth immediately. You are allowed to say, this hurt. Full stop. No decoration, no spiritual explanation, no performance of wisdom before your heart is ready. Just truth. This hurt. And then, slowly, I will not let what hurt me become the place where I keep looking for healing. That is a holy shift, a quiet one, a grown one. The kind of shift that may not look impressive from the outside, but changes everything inside. Because once a woman stops seeking healing from the person who wounded her, she begins to reclaim her own authority. She no longer needs him to say the right words to begin resting. She no longer needs him to regret it before she believes she mattered. She no longer needs him to come back before she feels chosen by life again. She no longer needs his confusion to become clarity because her own clarity is becoming enough. And yes, she may still cry, but her tears are no longer kneeling at the old door. They are watering the road ahead. They are helping her release the need to be validated by the one who invalidated her pain. They are softening the inner war. They are cleansing shame from places where she blamed herself for being human. They are helping her learn that a woman can be deeply wounded and still deeply worthy. So let this part be remembered. You did not become weak when you cried. You became visible to yourself. You saw the exhaustion. You saw the hope. You saw the wound. You saw the cost. You saw the part of you that kept believing love could be rescued by your devotion alone. And now, seeing all that, you can choose differently, not perfectly, differently. You can choose rest over rumination, truth over fantasy, boundaries over begging, self-respect over access, reality over longing, your own life over someone else's uncertainty. And each choice, no matter how small, becomes a stitch in the torn fabric of self-trust. One day, you may look back and realize the tears did not weaken you. They interrupted the lie. They interrupted the performance. They interrupted the habit of staying silent while your heart was being neglected. They interrupted the old belief that love must hurt this much to be real. They interrupted the story that said being unchosen by one person meant you were unworthy of being chosen at all. An interruption can be grace, painful grace, messy grace, grace with swollen eyes and trembling hands, grace that does not feel like light at first, but more like the end of denial. Still, grace, because it brought you back to the truth, and truth, even when it hurts, is safer than a beautiful lie that keeps taking pieces of you. So cry if the truth still hurts. Cry for the years. Cry for the silence. Cry for the unanswered goodbye. Cry for the woman who waited. Cry for the woman who loved. Cry for the future that dissolved. Cry for the parts of you that are tired. But while you cry, remember this. Your tears are not proof that you are weak. They are proof that your heart is no longer willing to be numb for the sake of surviving something that was slowly erasing you. And that is not weakness. That is life returning. There is a stage of healing where a woman begins to cry less for what she lost and more for what she tolerated. This is a different kind of grief. At first, the tears may have been about him, his absence, his silence, his betrayal, his failure to choose, his ability to walk away from something you were still holding with both hands. But later, the tears may turn inward, not in self-hatred, in recognition. You begin to remember the moments when your body knew before your mind admitted it. The heaviness before seeing his name. The way your stomach tightened when his tone changed. The way your heart tried to enjoy the good moments while quietly preparing for the next disappearance. The way you kept waiting for consistency from someone who made inconsistency feel normal. And you may cry because you realize you were not at peace for a long time. You were attached. You were hoping. You were functioning. You were explaining. You were surviving. But you were not at peace. That truth can break something open. Because peace is not a small thing. Peace is not weakness. Peace is not boredom. Peace is not the absence of passion. Peace is not what happens when love becomes dull. Peace is the body feeling safe enough to rest. Peace is not having to study someone's mood before speaking. Peace is not needing to shrink a question so it does not sound like a demand. Peace is not wondering whether honesty will make someone withdraw. Peace is not loving someone and feeling lonelier after every conversation. And when a woman realizes how long she lived without peace, she may cry in a way that feels almost ancient, because some part of her remembers what it was like before she started confusing emotional tension with connection. Some part of her remembers that love was not supposed to feel like standing outside a locked door, holding flowers, hoping someone inside would finally open it without making her feel foolish for knocking. A painful but clarifying truth is that many women do not cry because they are too sensitive. They cry because they have been desensitizing themselves for too long. They kept telling themselves it was not that bad. They kept calling distance a busy season. They kept calling neglect a misunderstanding. They kept calling anxiety insecurity. They kept calling inconsistency complexity. They kept calling their own exhaustion patience. And eventually, the body refuses to participate in the lie. The tears arrive like witnesses. They say, no, this hurt. They say, no, you were lonely. They say, no, you were not asking for too much. They say, no, you cannot keep turning abandonment into a problem you must solve alone. This is why crying can feel like a return to truth. For a long time, you may have edited the truth to keep the relationship alive. You may have told only half the story to friends, to family, to yourself. You may have spoken about the beautiful moments, but not the nights you felt emotionally abandoned. You may have said, he is just going through a lot, but not, I am disappearing inside his distance. You may have said, it is complicated, but not, I am being kept in uncertainty. You may have said, I understand him, but not, I am exhausted from understanding him more than I am being cared for by him. And when you finally stop editing, grief may rise. Because the full truth has weight, but it also has mercy. The full truth allows you to stop blaming yourself for pain that had a context. It allows you to see that your tears were not random. They were connected to repeated emotional injury. They were connected to being asked, directly or indirectly, to accept less than your heart needed while still giving more than your spirit could afford. They were connected to the slow erosion of self-trust. Betrayal does not only happen when someone lies, cheats, hides, or leaves. Sometimes betrayal begins when your inner knowing keeps saying, this is hurting me, and you keep negotiating against it to preserve the bond. That is a hard sentence, but it matters. Because healing after betrayal often includes healing from self-betrayal too. Not because you are guilty of what happened to you. You are not. The harm someone caused is theirs to own. But the recovery of your dignity may require you to look at the places where you stop protecting yourself in order to stay connected. This must be done gently, very gently, because a woman already carrying heartbreak does not need another voice accusing her. She needs truth with tenderness. She needs to be able to say, I stayed past the point of peace. I ignored what my body was trying to tell me. I accepted ambiguity because certainty would have forced me to grieve. I kept hoping because hope felt less painful than acceptance. I did not know how to leave without feeling like I was losing myself. And then she must be able to add, And I can learn from this without hating myself. That is where healing becomes mature. You do not excuse everything, but you do not destroy yourself with the truth either. You let truth become a lamp, not a weapon. A lamp shows the room clearly. A weapon wounds what is already tender. Use the truth as a lamp. Let it show you where you gave too much access too soon. Let it show you where you confused intensity with safety. Let it show you where you called your loneliness loyalty. Let it show you where the desire to be chosen made you accept conditions that left you emotionally hungry. Let it show you where your boundaries were not absent because you were foolish, but because somewhere inside you feared that boundaries would cost you love. Many women are afraid of boundaries because they have been trained to believe love requires unlimited understanding. But unlimited understanding can become a silent agreement to be hurt repeatedly. Boundaries do not mean you do not love. Boundaries mean love is no longer allowed to require your self-erasure. Boundaries mean you can care about someone without giving them the right to keep destabilizing your peace. Boundaries mean you are no longer willing to turn your body into a waiting room for someone else's emotional uncertainty. And yes, boundaries may make you cry. Because boundaries often ask you to disappoint the part of you that still wants the fantasy. They ask you to choose long-term peace over immediate relief. They ask you to let the ache exist without medicating it with the person who caused it. They ask you to stop reaching for the old door, even when your hands remember the shape of the handle. This is not easy. Do not let anyone make it sound easy. Choosing yourself after emotional abandonment can feel like losing the only language your heart has been speaking. For a while, your heart may keep speaking in old phrases. Maybe he will change. Maybe he did not mean it. Maybe one conversation could fix it. Maybe I should have been more patient. Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe this pain means the connection was special. But healing asks you to learn a new language. The language of reality. Reality says a pattern is more trustworthy than a promise. Reality says repeated confusion is not intimacy. Reality says someone can miss you and still not be able to love you well. Reality says a return is not repair. Reality says your peace matters even when your heart is attached. Reality says crying does not mean go back. Sometimes crying means finally let go of the illusion. And one day, this language will become more familiar. At first, it may feel severe, too clear, too final, too unlike the hopeful version of you who kept trying to make tenderness last. But clarity is not cruelty. Clarity is care. It is care for the woman who has already been through enough. It is care for the body that is tired of bracing. It is care for the mind that is tired of looping. It is care for the soul that is tired of translating silence into possibility. A deeper truth about being unchosen is that it often creates a split between reality and hope. Reality says he is not showing up. Hope says, but maybe he wants to. Reality says, he keeps leaving me uncertain. Hope says, but maybe he is scared. Reality says, this pattern is hurting me. Hope says, but maybe love is supposed to be patient. Reality says, I am losing myself. Hope says, but maybe if I hold on a little longer, it will all make sense. And for a while, a woman may live between these two voices until she is exhausted. Her tears may be the sound of that split. One part of her knows. Another part of her is not ready. One part is grieving. Another part is bargaining. One part is trying to leave. Another part is still setting the table. This is why she needs compassion, not judgment, not pressure, not someone saying, why don't you just move on? Because moving on from someone who kept you emotionally suspended is not only an act of will, it is the slow repair of reality inside the nervous system. You have to teach your body that the absence of chaos is not abandonment. You have to teach your heart that love does not have to arrive in unpredictable doses. You have to teach your mind that silence does not need to be decoded anymore. You have to teach your dignity that it is allowed to matter before there is a crisis. And this teaching happens through repetition. Again and again, you return to the truth. Again and again, you refuse to romanticize the pattern. Again and again, you let a wave of sadness pass without calling it proof that the past was right. Again and again, you remind yourself, I can feel this without following it. I can cry without contacting him. I can miss him without forgetting myself. I can grieve without rebuilding the cage. There is quiet strength in repetition. The world praises sudden transformation. But real healing is often repetitive, private, and unglamorous. It is the same decision made on different days with different levels of pain. It is choosing not to go back when you feel strong, and choosing not to go back when you feel lonely, and choosing not to go back when memory lies beautifully, and choosing not to go back when the night is long and the silence feels personal. That is strength. Not the kind that looks impressive, the kind that saves your life one decision at a time. There will be moments when you miss the tenderness so much that the harm becomes blurry. In those moments, do not attack yourself. Just complete the memory. If you remember the way he smiled, also remember the way you cried afterward. If you remember the warmth, also remember the waiting. If you remember the apology, also remember whether anything changed. If you remember the closeness, also remember the confusion that followed. If you remember feeling wanted, also remember whether you felt valued. This is not bitterness. This is balance. Longing edits. Healing restores the full picture. And the full picture is what protects you from turning a fragment into a future again. Many women return to what hurt them because they remember the fragment more vividly than the pattern. The one beautiful night. The one tender sentence. The one moment of vulnerability. The one time he looked like he finally understood. But a fragment is not a foundation. A moment is not a marriage. Tenderness without consistency is not safety. And emotion without responsibility is not love in a form that can hold a grown woman's heart. You deserve a love that does not require you to survive on memory. You deserve presence, not perfection, presence. Someone willing to be emotionally accountable. Someone whose care does not disappear when honesty becomes inconvenient. Someone who does not make your tears feel like a burden. Someone who does not benefit from your softness while resenting your needs. But before that kind of love can feel normal, you may have to grieve the kind of love you were trained to accept. You may have to grieve the belief that struggle proves depth. You may have to grieve the belief that being chosen after suffering means the suffering was worth it. You may have to grieve the belief that if you are patient enough, someone unavailable will eventually reward your endurance with devotion. That is not love. That is emotional waiting disguised as faith. And waiting can become a place where life quietly passes by. Your life is still here. That is the truth beneath the tears. Your life is still here, asking for you. Your body still needs rest. Your home still needs warmth. Your gifts still need expression. Your friendships still need presence. Your spirit still needs silence that does not hurt. Your future still needs your participation. And perhaps one of the saddest parts of heartbreak is how it convinces a woman to postpone her own life. She says, "When I feel better, I will begin. When I stop crying, I will return to myself. When I understand everything, I will move forward. When he apologizes, I will have peace. When the longing leaves, I will choose myself." But healing often begins before the feeling is gone. You can begin while still sad. You can begin while still tender. You can begin while still carrying questions. You can begin with swollen eyes and a tired heart. You can begin by making one corner of your life feel safe again. One clean room. One honest journal page. One meal eaten slowly. One walk without the phone. One boundary kept. One conversation with someone who does not require you to shrink your pain. One evening where you let yourself cry and still refuse to return to the thing that made crying your private language. That is how life comes back. Not all at once, but enough for one day. And then another. And then another. There is a gentle question worth asking. What would I do today if I believed my tears were not weakness, but a request for care? Would you rest instead of scrolling? Would you eat instead of waiting? Would you call a safe friend instead of checking on someone unsafe? Would you stop rereading old messages as if they contain the missing key? Would you place your hand on your heart and say, "I believe you"? Would you take your own pain seriously without making it your whole identity? This is the beginning of mothering yourself in the places where you were emotionally abandoned. Not because you should have to do it all alone. You deserve support. You deserve community. You deserve safe love. But there is also a way you must become present to yourself now. You must stop leaving yourself alone with the wound. You must stop treating your own heart the way they treated it. If they dismissed your pain, you must not dismiss it. If they ignored your needs, you must not ignore them. If they left you in silence, you must not silence yourself. If they made you feel too much, you must stop apologizing for having a heart that responds to injury. This is how you break the pattern. Not by forcing someone else to repair what they broke, but by refusing to continue the damage inside yourself. A woman returns to dignity when she becomes a safe witness to her own pain. She says, "I saw what happened. I know what it cost. I will not exaggerate it, but I will not minimize it. I will not use it to hate myself. I will use it to become more honest, more discerning, more faithful to my own peace." That is a powerful shift, and it may come with tears, because sometimes healing is not the end of crying. Sometimes healing is learning to cry without collapsing into shame. It is learning to cry without calling yourself foolish. It is learning to cry without making your tears a bridge back to someone who has not changed. It is learning to cry and then rise gently, drink water, wash your face, breathe, and continue choosing the life that is asking for you. That is not weakness. That is devotion turned inward. And perhaps that is what this season is teaching you. Not to stop loving, but to stop abandoning yourself in the name of love. Not to stop feeling, but to stop letting feeling outrank truth. Not to stop hoping, but to stop placing hope in patterns that have already shown you their limit. Not to stop being tender, but to let tenderness live beside discernment. You are allowed to remain a woman with a soft heart. You are allowed to still believe in goodness. You are allowed to want love again someday. You are allowed to be moved by beauty, sincerity, affection, and warmth. But now, let consistency matter. Let peace matter. Let your body's calm matter. Let emotional safety matter. Let clarity matter. Let the pattern matter more than the promise. And when you cry, let the tears remind you of what matters now. Not being chosen at any cost. Not proving you were lovable to someone who could not love well. Not winning someone back so the wound feels less humiliating. What matters now is returning to yourself with more honesty than before. What matters now is becoming a woman who no longer confuses abandonment with challenge, inconsistency with depth, or longing with destiny. What matters now is learning to say, I can love deeply and still leave what is not good for me. I can miss him and still choose peace. I can cry and still be strong. I can be hurt and still be worthy. I can grieve what happened without giving it the rest of my life. That final sentence is important. You can grieve what happened without giving it the rest of your life, because pain will ask for space. Give it space, but do not give it the whole house. Do not give it your future, your body, your joy, your voice, your womanhood, your faith in your own becoming. Let pain sit at the table for a while, if it must. Listen to what it came to say, but do not let it become the owner of the home. You are still the owner of your life. Even now, even with tears, even with unanswered questions, even after betrayal, even after silence, even after being unchosen, you are still the one who gets to decide what happens next inside your own becoming. And maybe today the next decision is small. Maybe today it is not sending the message. Maybe today it is deleting the thread. Maybe today it is telling one honest friend the truth. Maybe today it is allowing yourself to cry without checking whether he noticed your absence. Maybe today it is putting both feet on the floor and saying, I am still here and I will not leave myself. That is enough for today. Do not despise small beginnings. A woman rebuilds her life through small beginnings, through tiny acts of self-respect, through repeated returns to truth, through quiet refusals to reopen old wounds, through choosing peace before it feels natural, through letting tears fall and then letting them pass. One day, the tears will not frighten you as much. You will understand them. You will know that they came because you were alive, attached, wounded, honest, and healing. You will stop seeing them as proof of weakness. You will see them as part of the cleansing, part of the release, part of the long journey back to the woman who no longer needs to be chosen by someone unavailable in order to know she is worthy. And when that understanding settles in your bones, you will not be ashamed of the woman who cried. You will respect her because she felt what needed to be felt. She survived what needed to be survived. She finally stopped calling emotional starvation love. She finally started listening to the part of herself that had been whispering truth all along. And maybe that is the quiet miracle. Not that you never cried, but that your tears helped you hear yourself again. There comes a quiet morning when a woman begins to understand her tears differently. Not as proof that she failed, not as proof that she was too emotional, not as proof that she loved the wrong person too deeply, not as proof that she is weak, but as proof that something inside her refused to stay numb. For a long time, she may have believed strength meant not crying. Strength meant keeping her voice steady. Strength meant not letting anyone see the wound. Strength meant going to work with swollen eyes and saying, "I'm fine." Strength meant answering the phone normally. Strength meant carrying children, bills, family, responsibilities, and private grief without letting the world know that her inner life was shaking. But maybe that was not strength alone. Maybe some of it was survival. And survival deserves respect. But survival is not the same as healing. Healing begins when a woman is finally safe enough to tell the truth. I was hurt. I was betrayed. I was abandoned in ways that are hard to explain. I kept hoping longer than I should have. I cried because I was tired. I cried because I loved. I cried because I wanted to be chosen without having to beg for clarity. I cried because I was grieving a future I had already made room for in my heart. And when she can say those things without turning them into shame, something sacred begins to happen. She stops treating her tears like an enemy. She begins to see them as part of the return, a return to honesty, a return to the body, a return to self-respect, a return to the woman she was before confusion made her doubt her own worth. Not the same woman, perhaps, but a more truthful one. A woman who has learned that love must be more than intensity. A woman who has learned that longing is not always wisdom. A woman who has learned that being chosen in fragments can still leave the soul hungry. A woman who has learned that peace is not too much to ask for. And maybe that is one of the deepest lessons of this pain. You are not weak because you cried. You were weak only in the moments when you abandoned your own truth to protect an illusion. And even then, you were not worthless. You were learning. You were surviving. You were trying to make sense of a love that gave you warmth without shelter. But now, you know more. You know that someone can touch your heart and still not be safe for your life. You know that someone can miss you and still not be ready to honor you. You know that someone can return and still not repair. You know that someone can say the right words and still lack the character to live them. You know that chemistry can open the door, but consistency decides whether the house can stand. You know that a woman cannot build her future on moments that only appear when someone fears losing access to her. This knowledge may have cost you tears, but it is still knowledge, and knowledge becomes dignity when you let it change what you accept. That does not mean you become hard. Please do not confuse healing with hardness. Hardness says, I will never feel again. Healing says, I will feel, but I will listen to truth too. Hardness says, no one can be trusted. Healing says, trust must be built through consistency. Hardness says, my tenderness was a mistake. Healing says, my tenderness was precious, and I will place it more wisely now. Hardness says, I should be ashamed for crying. Healing says, my tears were honest, and honesty is not shameful. You do not have to become cold to become free. You do not have to stop being loving to stop being available to harm. You do not have to erase your softness to rebuild your dignity. You only have to stop giving sacred parts of yourself to people who handle them casually. That is the difference. There is a difference between being open and being unguarded. There's a difference between being forgiving and being repeatedly accessible. There is a difference between being patient and being emotionally starved. There is a difference between seeing someone's wound and volunteering to bleed beside it forever. And now you are learning the difference. Maybe slowly, maybe through tears, maybe through trembling boundaries, maybe through lonely evenings when your heart still misses what your wisdom knows it cannot survive. But you are learning, and that learning matters. One painful but clarifying truth is that your healing may not come with the apology you deserve. It may not come with him finally understanding. It may not come with him confessing everything. It may not come with him admitting that he mishandled you. It may not come with the neat ending your heart wanted. Sometimes healing begins without the other person participating at all. It begins when you decide that your life can no longer wait for someone else's honesty. It begins when you decide that your pain does not need to be validated by the person who caused it. It begins when you stop dragging an unanswered goodbye through the rooms of your mind, hoping it will finally explain itself. It begins when you say, I may never know everything, but I know enough about how this affected me. That sentence is powerful. I know enough. You may not know every hidden detail. You may not know what he truly felt. You may not know what he told himself. You may not know whether he regrets it. You may not know whether he ever understood the depth of what he damaged. But you know enough. You know how your body felt. You know how many nights you lost sleep. You know how often you question your own reality. You know how small you became while trying not to lose the connection. You know how long you waited for clarity. You know how often your peace depended on someone who was not careful with it. You know enough to stop returning to the fire and asking why you keep burning. That is not weakness. That is wisdom arriving after grief. And yes, you may still cry after wisdom arrives. Wisdom does not make the heart mechanical. Wisdom does not remove memory. Wisdom does not instantly erase attachment. Wisdom simply stands beside your pain and says, we are not going back to what broke us. That is all. Not with cruelty, not with pride, not with revenge, with calm truth. We are not going back to what broke us. There will be days when you need to repeat that sentence more than once. When the longing comes dressed as tenderness when the past looks softer than it was. When loneliness tries to convince you that even uncertainty was better than emptiness. When you remember his good moments and your heart begins to build a bridge back to him. Pause. Complete the memory. Remember the tenderness, yes, but also remember the trembling. Remember the laughter, yes, but also remember the silence. Remember the warmth, yes, but also remember the way you felt after he disappeared emotionally. Remember the hope, yes, but also remember what it cost you to keep that hope alive. This is not bitterness. This is protection. A woman must learn to protect herself from edited memories because memory can become dangerous when it only shows the golden parts. It can turn a wound into a shrine. It can make a half love look holy. It can make emotional starvation look like a season of testing. It can make a person's inconsistency look like depth. But you are not here to worship what wounded you. You are here to become whole. And wholeness requires the whole truth. The whole truth may be, I loved him and I was lonely. I miss him and I do not miss the anxiety. There were beautiful moments, and the pattern was not safe. I cried because it mattered, and now I must matter to myself too. That is the balance. That is emotional maturity. Not denying the love, not denying the harm, holding both, and choosing reality. Because healing begins when reality is finally allowed to become more sacred than longing. Longing may still speak, but it cannot be the only voice. Let dignity speak too. Let your body speak. Let your future speak. Let the woman you are becoming speak. Let her say, I deserve a life where love does not make me feel invisible. Let her say, I deserve affection that does not come with emotional famine. Let her say, I deserve clarity without begging. Let her say, I deserve to be chosen in a way my nervous system can rest inside. Let her say, I can be soft and still have standards. Let her say, I can cry and still be powerful. Because the power you are building now is not loud. It is not the power of proving him wrong. It is not the power of becoming unreachable. It is not the power of pretending you never cared. It is the power of returning to yourself with truth. It is the power of not reopening the wound for a temporary dose of comfort. It is the power of no longer explaining your pain to someone committed to ambiguity. It is the power of allowing a tear to fall without making it mean you should run back. It is the power of choosing peace while still shaking. That kind of power is quiet, but it changes a life. Maybe today you still feel tender. Maybe your eyes still fill when you think of what happened. Maybe part of you still wonders if he thinks of you. Maybe part of you still wants him to understand. Maybe part of you still feels embarrassed by how much this affected you. Be gentle with that part. She is not weak. She is wounded. And wounded parts do not need humiliation. They need care. Tell her, I know you wanted to be loved well. I know you waited. I know you gave more than you received. I know you were tired. I know you cried when no one saw. I know you are embarrassed by how long it took. I know you still miss pieces of him. And I will not shame you for being human. Then tell her something else. But we are not going to abandon ourselves anymore. We are not going to confuse crumbs with commitment anymore. We are not going to call anxiety devotion anymore. We are not going to turn silence into a language anymore. We are not going to beg confusion to become clarity anymore. We are not going to keep setting a table for a love that stopped arriving long ago. This is how you become safe for yourself again, line by line, choice by choice, tear by tear. And one day, maybe not soon, but one day, you will notice that the tears have changed. They will not always come with desperation. They will not always come with the urge to reach out. They will not always come with shame. Sometimes they will come gently, like rain after a long season of drought. They will cleanse. They will soften. They will release. They will help you say goodbye to the old version of yourself who believed she had to suffer beautifully to prove love was real. You will cry for her, but not with contempt, with reverence, because she carried so much. She kept hoping when hope was all she had. She loved with the tools she knew. She endured because she thought endurance might become safety. She stayed because leaving felt like losing not only him, but the imagined life she had built around him. And now you can take her hand. You can say, I understand why you stayed, and I love you enough to leave now. That is the tenderness that heals. Not self-hatred, not shame, not punishment. Tender truth. You do not need to hate the woman who cried. You need to honor her for telling the truth through tears when words were not ready. You need to thank her for finally refusing numbness. You need to protect her from returning to the places where she learned to doubt her own worth. There is a quiet dignity in this kind of ending. No dramatic revenge. No cold performance. No need to prove that you are unbothered. Just a woman choosing not to disappear inside someone else's inability. Just a woman saying, this hurt, but I am still here. This changed me, but it will not define all of me. I lost time, but I will not lose the rest of my life. I was unchosen by one person, but I will not become unavailable to myself. That is the return, and the return may be slow. Some days you will feel steady. Some days you will feel like you are back at the beginning. Some days you will feel clear. Some days longing will blur everything. But every time you come back to truth, you are healing. Every time you choose not to betray yourself after crying, you are healing. Every time you let yourself grieve without glorifying the wound, you are healing. Every time you protect your peace without apologizing for needing it, you are healing. Every time you remind yourself that tears are not weakness, you are healing. So let this be the truth you carry with you. You are not weak because you cried. You cried because you were carrying pain without enough tenderness. You cried because silence exhausted your mind. You cried because betrayal wounded your sense of self. You cried because being unchosen touched places in you that still needed care. You cried because your heart had been trying to make a home out of fragments. You cried because something in you was finally ready to stop pretending. And now, slowly, you are learning to live differently, not perfectly, differently. You are learning that love should not require emotional starvation. You are learning that your body's unease deserves attention. You are learning that self-respect may begin as grief before it becomes strength. You are learning that closure can begin when you stop asking the wrong person to validate your pain. You are learning that someone's inability to choose you does not erase the value of what you brought. You are learning that a woman does not become less worthy because someone consumed her love carelessly. And maybe one day you will see this season not as proof that you were weak, but as the place where you stopped abandoning yourself, the place where tears became truth, the place where grief became clarity, the place where longing finally bowed to reality, the place where dignity began to rise quietly from the floor where you once cried, not all at once, not without ache, but truly. And when you rise, you do not have to rise untouched. Rise honest, rise tender, rise Weezer. Rise with the knowledge that your softness survived. Rise with the understanding that your tears were never your shame. They were part of your becoming, part of your release, part of your return. You are not weak because you cried. You are a woman who felt what was real, a woman who survived what was hidden, a woman who grieved what was lost, a woman who is learning to choose herself without becoming cruel, a woman who can carry tenderness and boundaries in the same body, a woman who can love deeply and still leave what does not honor her, a woman who can cry and still be whole. And perhaps that is the quiet victory. Not that you never cried, but that after everything, you are still here, still becoming, still worthy, still capable of peace, still allowed to begin again.